They called her the burnt girl, 7 times rejected, 7 times humiliated. But on the 8th ribbon ceremony in Bitter Hollow, something changed. When the cruelest man in town staged his final mockery, when the entire hall erupted in laughter at her expense, the doors slammed open. A mountain hunter walked in, 6'4" of silent fury, and chose the woman everyone had cast aside. What happened next tore apart every rule that Frontier Town had ever known. Stay until the end of this story, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far Alara's journey travels. The ribbon hung limp in Alara Vance's calloused hands. She'd stopped bothering to iron it years ago. What was the point? The pale blue silk, faded now, more gray than sky, would spend tonight exactly where it had spent the last 7 ribbon ceremonies, draped across her lap, untouched, a monument to her isolation. Around her, the grand hall of Bitter Hollow pulsed with nervous energy. Young women in their finest dresses clustered like bouquets of hothouse flowers, their ribbons bright slashes of color against cream bodices and carefully curled hair. They whispered behind gloved hands, voices sharp with competition and calculation. This was the night that determined everything in Bitter Hollow: partnership, property, position. 1 ribbon, 1 choice, 1 year bound to whoever claimed you. The men lined the opposite wall, stiff in their Sunday suits, boots polished to a militant shine. They assessed the women with the same cool evaluation they'd use on livestock. Good teeth, wide hips, comes with land. Father owns the mill. Alara sat in the back corner, same chair as always. The wood had worn smooth under 7 years of her wait, 7 years of waiting for a humiliation that never quite finished killing her. The scar tissue pulled tight across the left side of her face when she clenched her jaw. The fire had been kind in some ways. It had taken her quickly. Her parents, her 2 younger brothers, the little house on Ash Creek Road, all of it consumed in less than an hour. She'd been 12, trapped under a collapsed beam, her face pressed against burning floorboards while she screamed for a mother who couldn't answer. The town had saved her body. They'd pulled her from the wreckage, treated her burns, buried her family in neat plots on Cemetery Hill. Then they'd decided her fate with the casual cruelty that small towns reserve for the powerless. Charity case. Ward of the church. A caution to young girls about the dangers of unattended candles. 15 years later, Alara was 27 and had survived every attempt to make her disappear. She worked as a seamstress, her scarred hand steadier with a needle than anyone in 3 counties. She lived alone in a room above the general store, paid her rent on time, spoke to no one unless spoken to first. She'd learned to make herself small, unobtrusive, easy to overlook, except on ribbon ceremony night. On ribbon ceremony night, she became a spectacle. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mayor Callum's voice boomed across the hall. He stood on the raised platform, sweat already darkening the armpits of his shirt despite the November chill seeping through the walls. "Welcome to Bitter Hollow's 143rd annual ribbon ceremony." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Alara's fingers tightened on her ribbon. Her stomach had been churning since breakfast, not that she'd managed to eat anything. You'd think 7 years of this would build immunity. It didn't. Every year, the hope crept back in like mold in a damp basement. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe someone would see past the scar, past the whispers, past the weight of being the girl who survived when her whole family didn't. Maybe someone would choose her. "The rules, as always, are sacred," Callum continued, warming to his role. He loved this night, loved the power of standing between chaos and order. Each woman will remain seated until chosen. Each man will make 1 selection and 1 selection only. The ribbon, once accepted, binds both parties for 1 full year. At next year's ceremony, you may choose to renew your bond. Scattered cheers from the married couples in attendance. Or make yourselves available once more. Alara had heard this speech 8 times. She could recite it in her sleep. The mayor droned on about tradition, about the founding families who'd established the ribbon ceremony to prevent the kind of violent competition for wives that had plagued other frontier settlements. Better to have rules, better to have order. Better to transform survival into ceremony. What he didn't mention, the ceremony only prevented certain kinds of violence. It did nothing about the cruelty that flourished in the space between rules. "Gentlemen," Callum stepped aside with a flourish. Make your choices. The hall erupted into motion. This was always the worst part. The first rush of men across the floor, boots thundering on wood, each one headed toward a specific woman with the confidence of someone who'd already negotiated the terms. Most ribbon ceremonies were decided weeks in advance. The actual event was just theater, a public confirmation of deals made in private. Thomas Wardell reached pretty Sarah Ames first, dropping to one knee with practiced grace. She blushed on cue, tied her yellow ribbon around his wrist with trembling fingers. The crowd cooed its approval. Marcus Grayson chose widow Catherine Hall, a practical match. He got her late husband's grain business. She got security for her 3 young daughters. One by one, the ribbons found wrists. Alara watched from her corner, trying to remember how to breathe normally. The crush of bodies moving across the hall, the excited chatter, the sheer concentrated want in the room, it pressed against her like a physical weight. No one looked her direction. Why would they? She was the burnt girl, the charity case, the walking reminder that bad things happen to good people and sometimes those people survived anyway, which was almost worse than if they hadn't. 15 minutes in, half the women had been chosen. The hall began to thin out as successful pairs made their way toward the mayor's table to register their bonds. Alara's hands had gone numb around her ribbon. Well, well. She knew that voice. Her spine went rigid. Dalton Reeves stepped into her line of sight, blocking the lamplight. 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of careless good looks that had always gotten him exactly what he wanted. His family owned half the county, timber rights, mining claims, the largest cattle operation between here and Denver. Dalton was Bitter Hollow royalty, and he wore the crown with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. He'd also made a yearly tradition out of tormenting Alara. Evening, Alara. His smile was all teeth, no warmth. Looking lovely as ever. The 2 men flanking him, his cousin Jeremiah and drinking buddy Webb Morrison, snickered right on cue. Alara didn't respond. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. Anything she said would just be ammunition. You know, Dalton continued, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, I was thinking, 7 years is a long time to go unchosen. That must be some kind of record. He turned to Jeremiah. Is that a record? Might be, Jeremiah drawled, though I heard old Mabel Pritchard went 9 years before she gave up and became a nun. Mabel was 60 and had a lazy eye, Webb added helpfully. Different situation entirely. The conversation around them had stopped. Alara could feel eyes turning toward her corner, could hear the whispers starting up like wind through dead leaves. Here we go, she thought distantly. The annual show. Dalton crouched down in front of her chair, bringing himself to eye level. This close, she could smell whiskey on his breath. He'd been drinking for courage, which meant he'd planned something special this year. The thing is, he said, voice dropping to mock sincerity, I feel bad. Watching you sit here year after year, all alone, nobody wanting you. He reached out and touched the edge of her ribbon, rubbing the silk between his fingers. Maybe that needs to change. Alara's heart kicked against her ribs. No, not this. Anything but this. Maybe, Dalton said slowly, making sure every word carried to the growing audience, I should be the one to finally choose you. The hall went dead silent. For one fragile, terrible second, Alara felt something crack open in her chest. Hope, despite everything, despite knowing better, despite 7 years of evidence that nothing good ever came from Dalton Reeves. He was still holding her ribbon. The crowd held its breath. Yeah, Dalton continued, nodding as if convincing himself. Yeah, you know what? I think I will. Then he dropped the ribbon like it had burned him. Nah. He stood up, brushing his hands on his pants in exaggerated disgust. Can't do it. Sorry, Alara. A man has standards. The laughter hit like a fist. It roared through the grand hall, bouncing off the rafters, building on itself until the whole room shook with it. People actually doubled over. Someone's drink went flying. At the mayor's table, even Callum was smirking behind his hand. Alara sat frozen, the ribbon pooled in her lap like spilled water. This was worse than the previous years. Dalton usually just made a cruel comment and moved on. But this manufactured moment of hope followed by public rejection, This was a new level of calculated cruelty. I mean, look at her, Dalton said over the laughter, gesturing at Alara like she was an object in a museum. Even charity has its limits, right? More laughter.
This story
Webb
was
slapped
posted
Dalton
on the
back.
channel west of
You had
Betrayal.
me going there
Please
for a
do not
second.
repost it in any
Thought you
form.
lost your mind, Jeremiah added, wiping tears from his eyes. Alara's vision had narrowed to a tunnel. The scar tissue on her face felt hot, tight, like the fire was happening all over again. Her hands shook. The ribbon slipped through her fingers and puddled on the floor. She should leave, stand up, walk out, hold on to whatever dignity remained. But her legs wouldn't move. The laughter was starting to fade now, people returning to their own conversations, their own dramas. Dalton and his friends were already walking away, their entertainment concluded. Alara bent down slowly and picked up her ribbon. The silk was dusty from the floor. She brushed it off with mechanical precision, her mind somewhere far away from this hall, this night, this life. 8 years. Maybe Jeremiah was right. Maybe she should just give up, become a nun or a hermit, or move to a city where nobody knew about the fire, about her family, about the girl who survived. Maybe the doors slammed open. Every head turned. A man stood in the entrance, backlit by moonlight, and the torches burning in their iron brackets outside. For a moment he was just a silhouette, impossibly tall, impossibly broad, wearing a heavy coat that made him look even larger. Then he stepped into the hall proper, and the lamplight found him. 6'4", maybe taller, shoulders wide enough to fill a doorway. Dark hair pulled back from a face that looked like it had been carved from granite with a dull chisel. All hard angles, no softness, eyes the color of a winter storm. He had a scar of his own, a thin white line that ran from his right temple to his jaw. He moved like a predator, each step deliberate and controlled. The room had gone silent again, but this was a different kind of silence. This was the hush that falls when something dangerous enters a space full of soft, comfortable people. The stranger's gaze swept across the hall, taking in the ribbons, the nervous women, the men who suddenly seemed much smaller than they had moments ago. Mayor Callum found his voice first. "Sir, I'm afraid the ceremony is well underway. If you're here to make a selection, you'll need to. I know the rules." The stranger's voice was deep, rough around the edges, like he didn't use it often. He had an accent Alara couldn't place, something from the high country maybe, or farther north. He started walking, past the mayor's table, past the clusters of paired couples registering their bonds, past the few remaining unclaimed women who straightened in their chairs, hope flashing across their faces. He didn't look at any of them. He walked straight toward the back corner, straight toward Alara. The crowd parted without thinking, bodies moving on instinct to get out of this man's path. Whispers started up again, confused and speculative. "Who is that? Never seen him before. Look at the size of him. That coat's worth more than my horse." Alara couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The stranger was maybe 10 feet away now, close enough that she could see his eyes weren't just storm-colored. They were blue, pale blue, the color of ice over deep water. And they were locked on her, 5 feet, 3. He stopped directly in front of her chair. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Really looked, in a way that felt invasive and oddly gentle at the same time. His gaze tracked across her face, the scar tissue, the way her left eye sat slightly lower than her right, the permanent tightness in her skin where it had healed wrong. She waited for the disgust, the pity, the polite discomfort. It didn't come. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled something out. It was a pelt, silver-white fur, thick and luxurious, the kind of quality that made people whisper about fortunes. A silver fox, rare as hen's teeth in these mountains, worth more than most people made in a year. He laid it across her lap, the weight of it solid and real against her thighs. "I'll take your ribbon," he said. The hall exploded. Shouts of surprise, confusion, outrage. Chairs scraped as people stood to get a better view. Someone dropped a glass and it shattered on the floor. Alara stared at the pelt, then at the stranger, then back at the pelt. This wasn't happening. This was some fever dream, some hallucination brought on by too much humiliation and not enough food. But the fur was real under her hands, soft, warm. "You..." Her voice came out broken. She swallowed and tried again. "You don't know me." Don't need to? He pulled his coat back slightly, revealing a wrist already bare, waiting for her ribbon. Wait just a damn minute. Dalton's voice cut through the chaos. He pushed through the crowd, his face red with anger and confusion. Who the hell are you? The stranger didn't take his eyes off Alara. Name's Rowan Hale. Well, Rowan Hale, you can't just walk in here and... I followed the rules. Rowan's voice went flat, dangerous. I made a selection. She hasn't accepted yet, but that's her choice. Not yours. This is insane. Dalton looked around for support. Mayor Callum, you can't allow this. He's not even from Bitter Hollow. The ceremony is open to all unmarried men, Callum said slowly, consulting the leather-bound book on his table. There's no residency requirement in the founding charter. But she, Dalton sputtered, gesturing wildly between Rowan and Alara. This isn't how it works. No? Rowan turned to face Dalton fully, and something in that small movement made Dalton take an involuntary step back. How does it work then? You got rules about who gets rejected, who gets humiliated for sport? Dalton's jaw worked soundlessly. Thought so. Rowan turned back to Alara. His expression softened fractionally. Your choice. Say no, and I walk out right now. Say yes, and you tie that ribbon on my wrist and we leave together. Either way, I won't bother you again. Alara's hand shook so hard the pelt nearly slid off her lap. This was a trick. Had to be. Some elaborate setup orchestrated by Dalton, a new level of cruelty disguised as kindness. But Dalton looked genuinely furious, confused, off balance. And Rowan Hale didn't look like someone who participated in tricks. Why? The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Rowan crouched down, same as Dalton had earlier, but the effect was completely different. He made himself smaller for her, less threatening, close enough that she could see the scars on his hands, work scars, fight scars, the kind that came from a hard life lived outside of ceremony halls and polite society. Because 7 times is enough, he said quietly. Because I walked in and saw you sitting here holding a ribbon nobody wanted, and that told me everything I needed to know. What did it tell you? She was crying now, hot tears cutting tracks down her face. That you're strong. He said it like it was the simplest fact in the world. That you survived something that killed everyone else. That you kept coming back to this goddamn hall year after year, even though they made it hell for you. That kind of strength. He shook his head. That's worth more than every perfect woman in this room combined. The hall had gone quiet again, everyone straining to hear. Alara looked down at her ribbon. Dusty pale blue, worn at the edges from 7 years of being clutched in nervous hands. Then at the silver fox pelt, worth a fortune, given to her like it was nothing. Then at Rowan Hale's wrist, bare and waiting. She'd survived the fire. Survived losing everything. Survived 15 years of being the charity case, the cautionary tale, the burnt girl. Maybe she could survive being chosen. Her hand still shook as she picked up the ribbon, but she managed to wrap it around his wrist. The silk looked strange against his scarred skin, too delicate for someone this rough around the edges. She tied it off with the traditional knot, 3 loops, 1 tail. Rowan stood, offering her his hand. She took it. His palm was calloused, warm, steady. He pulled her to her feet gently, then bent and collected the silver fox pelt, draping it over her shoulders like a cloak. We done here? He asked, but he was looking at her, not the crowd. Alara nodded, not trusting her voice. They started toward the door. Wait! Dalton's shout stopped them. This is bullshit! You can't just... This whole thing is wrong! Rowan paused, turning slowly. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made everyone listen. 7 years, he said. 7 years you watched her come to this ceremony. 7 years you did nothing but make it worse. You don't get to complain now that someone else saw what you couldn't. And what's that? Dalton sneered, trying to reclaim his audience. A charity case? A burned-up girl nobody wants? A survivor. Rowan's hand tightened fractionally around Alara's. Something you wouldn't recognize if it bit you. He turned back toward the door, and this time they made it all the way outside. The November air hit like a slap, cold and clean after the stuffy warmth of the grand hall. Alara gulped it down, her lungs working overtime, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack a rib. Behind them, the hall erupted into noise,
This
arguments,
story was
speculation,
posted on the channel
scandal.
west of Betrayal.
Rowan led her away
Please
from the
do not
building,
repost
down
it
the main
in any
street toward
form.
the edge of town where the shops gave way to houses, gave way to wilderness. A horse waited in the shadows, a massive roan stallion with intelligent eyes and a coat that gleamed even in the moonlight. Rowan had tied him to a post outside the blacksmith's shop. "This is Storm," he said, stroking the horse's neck. "He doesn't bite. Much." Alara laughed. It came out half sob, slightly hysterical, but it was laughter. Rowan looked at her, something like approval in his eyes. "You all right?" "I don't know." She pulled the pelt tighter around her shoulders. "I don't know what I am." "Fair enough." He untied Storm's reins. "You got anything you need from your room? Clothes? Supplies?" Yes, but..." She looked back toward the general store. "What's happening? What am I doing?" "You're leaving Bitter Hollow," Rowan said simply. "Unless you want to stay. But I'm guessing you don't." She didn't. She really, really didn't. "My room's above the store," she said. "I don't have much." "Get it. I'll wait." Alara ran, up the exterior stairs into her tiny room with its narrow bed and single window. She owned almost nothing: a few dresses, a coat, her sewing supplies, the small wooden box that held her mother's wedding ring, and her father's pocket watch. She shoved it all into a canvas bag, her hands moving on autopilot. This was crazy. Completely insane. She didn't know this man, didn't know where he lived or what he wanted or why he'd chosen her, but she knew what waited if she stayed. More ceremonies, more rejection, more years of being the cautionary tale. She was 27 years old, and she'd survived a fire that should have killed her. Maybe it was time to survive something else. She grabbed the bag and ran back downstairs. Rowan hadn't moved. He stood beside Storm, scanning the street with the easy alertness of someone used to trouble. "Ready?" he asked. "Yes." He helped her onto the horse, his hands careful, respectful, then swung up behind her. The saddle was built for one, but he made it work, his chest solid against her back, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. "Hold on," he said. Then he kicked Storm into motion, and they left Bitter Hollow behind. They rode through the night, following trails that seemed invisible to Alara, but that Rowan navigated with absolute confidence. The moon rose higher, painting the mountain landscape in shades of silver and shadow. Alara should have been terrified. She was alone with a strange man, riding toward an unknown destination, everything she knew falling away behind her with each step the horse took. But the fear didn't come. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 15 years, the possibility of being safe. The pelt around her shoulders smelled like pine and winter wind. Rowan's heartbeat was steady against her spine. Storm's hooves found purchase on rocks she couldn't even see. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "My valley," Rowan said. "About 6 hours northeast. Hidden. Private. Nobody knows about it except me." "Why did you come to the ceremony?" The question had been burning in her since he'd walked through those doors. "The truth." He was quiet for a long moment. The forest breathed around them, full of small sounds, wind through pine needles, a creek running somewhere to their left, an owl asking its question of the night. "I needed a wife," he said finally. Her stomach dropped. Of course. That's what this was. A transaction, same as every ribbon ceremony had ever been. "But," Rowan continued, "I needed the right kind. Someone who wouldn't break when things got hard. Someone who'd already proven they could survive." "How did you know about me?" "I didn't, not specifically." His arm shifted slightly on the reins. "I've been watching Bitter Hollow for 3 years, coming down from the mountains during ceremony season. Looking. For someone scarred? For someone strong." He said it firmly. "The scar just told me where to look. I saw how they treated you, saw you come back anyway. That takes something most people don't have." "It might just be stupidity," Alara muttered. She felt rather than saw his smile. "Might be. Guess we'll find out." They rode on. As the night deepened, Alara felt exhaustion creeping in. The adrenaline that had carried her through the ceremony, through packing, through fleeing, It was wearing off, leaving her shaky and strange. Her head started to nod. "Sleep if you want," Rowan said quietly. "I've got you." She shouldn't trust this, trust him, trust any of it. But her body made the decision for her. Her eyes drifted closed. Her head settled back against his chest. The last thing she heard before sleep took her was Rowan's voice, so quiet she might have imagined it. "You're safe now." And against all reason, all evidence, all logic, she believed him. Elara woke to gray dawn light filtering through pine branches and the smell of coffee. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. The ground beneath her was hard, unfamiliar. The air tasted different, cleaner, thinner. Then memory crashed back. The ceremony, Rowan, the midnight ride into the mountains. She sat up too quickly, and her vision swam. "Easy." Rowan's voice came from her left. He crouched beside a small fire, pouring coffee from a battered tin pot into 2 metal cups. "You've been asleep about 4 hours. We stopped around 2. Elara looked around. They were in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, the ground carpeted with needles that had provided more cushion than she'd expected. Storm grazed nearby, his reins tied loosely to a low branch. The horse looked completely unbothered by their circumstances. She was still wearing her ceremony dress, wrinkled now, stained with pine sap and dirt. The silver fox pelt had slipped during the night and lay bunched around her waist like an expensive blanket. "Here." Rowan held out one of the cups. She took it with shaking hands. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, no sugar, no milk. It tasted like heaven. "Thank you," she managed. He nodded and returned to his own cup, settling back on his heels. In the morning light, he looked less like a mountain legend and more like a man, tired around the eyes, a day's worth of stubble darkening his jaw, his hair escaping from the leather tie he'd used to pull it back. The silence stretched. Elara searched for something to say and came up empty. "What did you talk about with a stranger who'd upended your entire life in the span of an hour?" "You snore," Rowan said finally. What?" "You snore. Not loud, but definitely snoring." He said it without judgment, like he was commenting on the weather. Elara felt heat creep up her neck. "I do not." "You do. Storm agrees with me." He gestured at the horse, who chose that moment to snort. "See?" Despite everything, she almost smiled. "That doesn't count as evidence." "Fair enough." He drained his cup and stood, moving with the kind of fluid efficiency that suggested every action was planned, nothing wasted. "We should get moving. Another 2 hours to the valley, and I'd rather make it before full daylight." "Why?" "Because I don't want anyone following us." The words landed like stones. Elara had been so focused on leaving, on escaping, that she hadn't thought about pursuit. But of course there would be pursuit. She'd tied her ribbon to a stranger and vanished into the night. There would be questions, concerns. Dalton would make sure of that. "Will they?" she asked. "Follow us?" Rowan was already kicking dirt over the fire, methodical and thorough. "Probably. Town like Bitter Hollow, they'll feel entitled. Think they have a right to check on you. Make sure you're safe." He looked at her. "Are you safe, Elara?" It was the first time he'd used her name. It sounded strange in his rough voice, too gentle for a man his size. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. Something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe. "That's the right answer. Don't trust me just because I gave you a way out. Trust takes longer than one night." He finished with the fire and moved to Storm, checking the saddle, adjusting straps. "But I'm going to tell you something true, and you can decide if you believe it. I brought you to my valley because I need a partner, someone to help me survive up here. It's hard living, Elara. Cold winters, dangerous wildlife, no town to run to when things break. I can hunt, trap, build what needs building, but I can't do it all. Not alone." "Why not just hire help?" Elara heard herself ask. "Pay someone to work for you?" "Because hired help leaves. Partnership is different, permanent." He swung up onto Storm with practiced ease and offered her his hand. "You don't have to decide anything right now. Come see the valley. Stay a few days. If you hate it, I'll take you wherever you want to go. Town, city, another territory entirely. Your choice." Elara stared at his outstretched hand, scarred knuckles, dirt under the nails, a callus on his palm from holding reins. An honest hand, she thought. the hand of someone who worked for what he had. She took it. They rode higher into the mountains as the sun climbed, following switchbacks so narrow that Alara had to close her eyes
This story
sometimes
was
and
posted
just
on the
trust
channel
Storm's
West
footing.
of Betrayal.
The temperature
Please
dropped.
do not repost
Her breath
it
came
in
out
any
in white
form.
puffs. The silver fox pelt became necessary rather than decorative. Rowan didn't talk much, but he pointed things out as they went. Landmarks, mostly. A lightning-struck pine that marked the beginning of his territory. A creek that ran year-round, good for fresh water. A granite outcropping shaped like a broken tooth where he'd once seen a grizzly.
"You see many bears?" Alara asked. "Sometimes. They mostly keep to themselves if you don't bother them. And if you do bother them, then you better have a good rifle and better aim." He shifted slightly in the saddle. "There's a Winchester in my pack. You know how to shoot?" "No." "I'll teach you." He said it like it was already decided, like of course she'd stay long enough to learn. The assumption should have bothered her. Instead, it felt almost comforting, this man planning a future that included her in it. They crested a ridge and Rowan pulled Storm to a stop. "There," he said quietly. Alara looked down. The valley spread below them like a secret, hidden between two mountain ridges and accessible only through the narrow pass they'd just climbed. Maybe 200 acres of relatively flat land, heavily forested on the western edge, opening into meadow on the east. A river cut through the center, fast-moving and clear. And nestled against the northern ridge, barely visible through the trees, was a cabin. It looked solid, well-built. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, which meant, "You left a fire burning?" Alara asked. "Banked it before I left. Should still have coals." Rowan urged Storm forward, beginning the careful descent. Valley's got its own weather patterns, warmer than you'd expect for the elevation. The river doesn't freeze completely even in January, and the ridge blocks the worst of the north wind. He was selling it to her, Alara realized, trying to make it sound appealing. "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. Rowan glanced back at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Yeah, it is." They reached the valley floor, and Storm broke into a trot, clearly recognizing home. The cabin resolved into focus as they approached, bigger than Alara had expected, built from logs that had been carefully fitted and chinked. A covered porch ran the length of the front, glass windows, a real luxury this far from civilization. A lean-to stable attached to the side, currently empty. Rowan dismounted first, then helped Alara down. Her legs wobbled when her feet hit the ground. Too many hours on horseback after years of sitting at a sewing table. "Come on," Rowan said. "I'll show you inside." The cabin's interior was dark after the bright mountain morning, but as her eyes adjusted, Alara took in details. One large main room dominated by a fieldstone fireplace, embers still glowing in the grate. A cast-iron stove in the corner that served as kitchen. Shelves lined with supplies, canned goods, dried meat, flour sacks. A sturdy table with two mismatched chairs. Furs on the floor, more furs on the single bed pushed against the far wall. It was Spartan, functional, clean. It was the loneliest place Alara had ever seen. "I know it's not much," Rowan said, watching her face. "But it's warm, safe. Nobody comes up here." "Where do you sleep?" Alara asked, eyeing the single bed. "I built a loft." He pointed up. She'd missed it in the dimness. A platform accessible by a ladder, tucked under the peaked roof. "Figured you'd want the bed. More privacy." He'd thought about that. Before he'd even chosen her, he'd considered where she would sleep. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. 3 years. He moved to the stove and started building up the fire, his hands quick and competent. "Since I found this valley. It's good land, Alara. Remote enough that nobody bothers you, close enough to game that you won't starve. But it's too much for one person. I've been looking for the right partner since I built the cabin." "Why didn't you choose someone the first year, or the second?" "Because none of them were right." He set a kettle on the stove. "Bitter hollows full of women who want comfort, society, safety. Nothing wrong with that. But up here, you need someone who's already survived something hard. Someone who won't break when winter comes, and we're snowed in for 3 months straight." "You thought I wouldn't break because of my scar," Alara said flatly. "I thought you wouldn't break because you came back." Rowan turned to face her. 7 times, Alara. You could have left Bitter Hollow after the first ceremony, found a city, started over somewhere nobody knew your story, but you stayed. You kept coming back to that goddamn hall even though they humiliated you every single time. That's not weakness. That's stubborn, bloody-minded strength. And that's what I need up here. Alara sat down heavily in one of the chairs. Her hands were shaking again. What if I can't do it? What if I'm not as strong as you think? Then we figure it out. He poured hot water into 2 fresh cups. Tea this time. She could smell the herbs. I'm not expecting you to become a mountain woman overnight. This is a partnership.
We teach each other. I know hunting, trapping, tracking. You know, what do you know? Sewing, she said. Mending. I can cook if the ingredients aren't too complicated. I can read. I can't. The admission hung in the air between them. You can't read? Alara repeated. Never learned. Grew up working the high country with my father. He could sign his name, and that was about it. Rowan handed her the tea. I've got a few books here. Belong to the man who owned this land before me. Can't make sense of them. If you stayed, maybe you could read to me sometimes. I'd like that. It was such a small thing. Such a simple want. But the way he said it, like reading aloud might be a gift rather than a chore, made something in Alara's chest ache. I could do that, she said quietly. They drank their tea in silence. Outside, Storm whinnied, wanting to be unsaddled and brushed down. Rowan stood to take care of it, then paused. You can leave any time, he said. I want to be clear about that. You're not trapped here. If you want to go back to Bitter Hollow, I'll take you. If you want me to take you somewhere else, I'll do that too. This only works if you choose it. What if I choose wrong? The question came out smaller than she'd intended. Then you choose again. He opened the door, letting in a shaft of cold sunlight. That's how life works, isn't it? You make the best choice you can with what you know, and if it turns out wrong, you make another choice. He left to tend to Storm, the door clicking shut behind him. Alara sat alone in the cabin and tried to figure out what she felt. Terrified, definitely. Confused, exhausted. But underneath all of that, something else. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. She stood and walked to one of the windows. From here she could see Rowan working in the lean-to stable, brushing down Storm with long, practiced strokes. He moved like someone who'd spent his whole life with horses, reading the animal's mood in the set of his ears, the way he shifted his weight. Alara touched her face, fingers tracing the familiar landscape of scar tissue. In Bitter Hollow, this had defined her. The burnt girl. The tragedy. The warning. What would she be here? A partner. A wife. A woman who read books aloud in the evening and learned to shoot a rifle and survived winters that would kill softer people. It sounded impossible. It sounded like the first real choice she'd made in 15 years. She was still standing at the window when hoofbeats echoed through the valley. Rowan heard them too. He dropped the brush and moved to the corner of the stable where he'd leaned a rifle. The Winchester he'd mentioned earlier. He checked it with swift efficiency, loaded, ready, then stepped out into the open. Alara's heart kicked into a faster rhythm. Through the window, she watched 2 riders enter the valley from the same path she and Rowan had used. Even at a distance, she recognized the lead horse. Dalton. And riding beside him, wearing a deputy's badge that caught the sunlight, was Webb Morrison. Rowan stood in front of the cabin, the rifle held loosely in both hands, not pointing it at anyone. Not yet. But the message was clear. Dalton and Webb reined in about 30 feet away. Their horses were breathing hard, flanks dark with sweat. They'd ridden fast to catch up. "Mr. Hale," Dalton called out, his voice carrying across the clearing. "We need to have a conversation." "About what?" "About the woman you took from the ceremony." Dalton's eyes flicked toward the cabin. "We're here on official business. Webb's deputized by Mayor Callum himself. We have a right to check on Alara's well-being." "She's fine," Rowan said flatly. "With respect, we'd like to hear that from her." Webb's hand rested on the pistol at his hip, not threatening, just present. Alara made a decision. She opened the cabin door and stepped out onto the porch. Both men stared. She was still wearing her rumpled ceremony dress, her hair loose and wild from the ride, the silver fox pelt draped over her shoulders like she was some kind of mountain queen. "I'm fine," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Alara." Dalton swung down from his horse, his face a mask of concern that didn't reach his eyes. You don't have to pretend. If this man forced you, coerced you in any way, he didn't.
This story was
You
posted
barely
on the
know
channel
him.
west
He
of
could have told you
Betrayal.
anything.
Please do not
promised you
repost
anything.
it in any
And
form.
you know me so well? The words came out sharp. After 7 years of making sure I knew exactly how worthless I was, Dalton had the grace to look uncomfortable. Last night I was drunk. I didn't mean, yes, you did. Alara stepped off the porch, moving to stand beside Rowan. You meant every word, every laugh, every year. You made sure I knew exactly what Bitter Hollow thought of me. We're worried about you, Webb interjected, trying a different approach. This is a big decision, life-changing. Maybe you should come back to town. Think about it for a few days. I thought about it for 7 years, Alara said. I'm done thinking. Dalton's expression hardened. So that's it? You're just going to stay up here with a stranger? Live in the wilderness like an animal? Better than living in Bitter Hollow like a ghost. The silence that followed was broken only by the river running through the valley, indifferent to human drama. Rowan hadn't moved. He stood beside Alara, the rifle still in his hands, watching the two men with the kind of attention a predator gives to threats near its den. The ribbon's been tied, he said quietly, by the rules of your own ceremony. That makes Alara my wife for the next year. You have no authority here. The hell we don't, Dalton snapped. This whole thing was irregular from the start. You're not from Bitter Hollow? Nobody knows anything about you. For all we know, you're a wanted man hiding in these mountains. I'm not. Prove it. Rowan's jaw tightened. For a long moment, Alara thought he might actually tell them to leave, might raise the rifle and enforce the boundary of his valley with violence if necessary. Instead, he sighed. My name is Rowan Hale. I was born in the Cascade territory, about 200 miles north of here. My father was a trapper, same as his father before him. I worked the high country my whole life until 3 years ago, when I found this valley and decided to settle. I'm not wanted. I've never killed anyone who didn't try to kill me first. And I have enough money saved that I don't need to steal. He paused. Satisfied? No, Dalton said, because none of that tells us whether Alara is safe with you. I can answer that myself, Alara said. I'm safe, or at least I'm as safe as I choose to be, and that's more than I ever had in Bitter Hollow. Webb dismounted now, his hand still near his gun. Miss Vance, Mrs. Hale, Alara corrected. The name felt strange on her tongue, unfamiliar, but she said it anyway. For the next year at least. Mrs. Hale, Webb amended carefully. The mayor sent us to make sure you're here of your own free will, that there's been no coercion. There hasn't. Then why leave in the middle of the night? Why not stay for the registration, make it official? Because I wanted to leave, Alara said simply. Because Rowan offered me a choice, and I took it. That's all. Dalton laughed, sharp and bitter. A choice. Right. The burnt girl gets one offer from a mountain hermit, and suddenly she's making choices. Careful, Rowan said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Or what? You'll shoot me? Dalton gestured at the rifle. That would solve your problems, wouldn't it? Get rid of the witnesses, keep the girl isolated up here where nobody can... He didn't get to finish. Rowan moved faster than Alara had thought possible for a man his size. One moment he was standing still, the next he was in Dalton's space, the rifle butt striking up to catch Dalton under the chin. Not hard enough to break anything, but hard enough to snap his head back and send him stumbling. Webb's gun cleared its holster. Don't. Rowan didn't even look at the deputy. His eyes stayed locked on Dalton. You came up here pretending to care about her safety, but all you care about is your pride. You're angry because for once, someone looked at Alara and saw something worth choosing. Dalton spat blood onto the ground. You don't know anything about Bitter Hollow, about our traditions. I know enough. Rowan stepped back, putting space between them. I know you've got a town full of rules that only protect certain people. I know those rules failed Alara 7 times, and I know she's better off here than she ever was there. That's not your decision to make, Webb said, his gun still drawn but not quite pointing at anyone. It's mine. Alara's voice cut through the tension. My decision, and I've made it. You can report back to Mayor Callum that I'm fine. I'm staying. And if anyone else from Bitter Hollow comes up here, they won't be welcome. Dalton climbed back to his feet, working his jaw. This is a mistake, Alara. You'll see that. Come winter, when you're trapped up here with a stranger, when the reality of what you've chosen sets in, then I'll deal with it, she said, same as I've dealt with everything else. The two men exchanged glances. Some silent conversation passed between them, the kind of communication that came from years of friendship. Finally, Webb holstered his gun. We'll report back that you're here voluntarily, he said. But Alara, Mrs. Halo, if you change your mind, if you need help, there's a way down to town. You remember the trail markers? She nodded. All right then. Webb mounted his horse. We've done our duty. What happens next is on you. Dalton took longer to remount, his pride clearly stinging worse than his jaw. Before turning his horse, he looked at Alara one more time. You could have had a real life, he said. Bitter Hollow would have taken care of you eventually. Someone did, Alara interrupted. Just not who you expected. Dalton's face twisted into something ugly. Then he wheeled his horse and kicked it into motion. Webb followed, and together they rode back toward the pass, their horses' hooves kicking up small stones. Rowan and Alara stood side by side, watching until the riders disappeared from view. That won't be the end of it, Rowan said quietly. I know. They'll talk. The town will decide I'm dangerous or you're being held against your will or... I know, Alara said again. Let them talk. Rowan looked at her, something like surprise in his expression. You're taking this well, am I? She laughed, a little shaky. I don't feel like I'm taking it well. I feel like I just burned every bridge I had. Did you have bridges or just ropes around your neck? The question hung in the mountain air. Alara thought about her room above the general store, her sewing work, always available because the seamstress couldn't say no, the ribbon ceremonies, year after year, hope dying a little more each time, the way people looked through her instead of at her. Ropes, she admitted. Then you didn't lose anything. Rowan started back toward the stable. Come on. For staying, we've got work to do. The rest of the day passed in a blur of practical tasks. Rowan showed Alara where he kept supplies, how the stove worked, which creek had the best water for drinking. He taught her to recognize the sound of the valley's resident elk herd, the difference between a branch breaking naturally and one broken by something moving through the forest. It was overwhelming. Alara's head swam with information, her hands clumsy with tasks that Rowan performed without thinking. But he was patient. When she fumbled with the water bucket, spilling half of it on the walk back from the creek, he just showed her a better way to carry it. When she nearly burned the simple stew he'd started for dinner, he adjusted the heat and explained how the stove's temperament changed with the wind direction. They ate as the sun set, painting the valley in shades of orange and gold. The stew was basic, venison, potatoes, wild onions, but it tasted better than anything Alara had eaten in months. Tomorrow, Rowan said, mopping up the last of his meal with a piece of flatbread, I'll take you around the valley properly, show you the boundary markers, the good foraging spots where I set my trap lines. Trap lines? How I make money. Furs, mostly. Some people think it's cruel, but up here it's survival. He glanced at her. That bother you? Alara thought about it. I don't know, maybe. But I also know I'm wearing a silver fox pelt that probably came from a trap. It did. Caught him last winter. He was old, probably wouldn't have survived a spring anyway. Rowan stood and began clearing the plates. I don't trap for sport, only what I need. Is that what I am? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Something you need? Rowan paused, his hand still on the dishes. Yeah, he said finally, but need goes both ways. I'm hoping you'll come to need this valley too. Need the quiet, the space, the feeling of being somewhere nobody can touch you. He was right. She did need that. She just didn't know yet if she could pay the price for it. That night, Alara lay in Rowan's bed, her bed now, she supposed, and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the valley, wind in the pines, the river's constant murmur, an owl hunting somewhere in the darkness. Above her, she could hear Rowan moving in the loft, the creak of wood, the rustle of furs as he settled in. Rowan? She called up. Yeah? Thank you. For today. For...
She struggled to find words. For seeing me. A long pause, then, "You're worth seeing, Ilara." She lay awake for a long time
This
after
story
that,
was
her
posted
fingers
on the
tracing
channel
scar
West
on
of
her face,
Betrayal.
wondering
Please
what
do not
tomorrow would
repost
bring,
it in any
wondering
form.
if she'd made the right choice, wondering if there even was a right choice, or if life was just a series of gambles, and this was hers. Outside, the valley held its breath, and Ilara Hale, for now, closed her eyes and tried to believe in new beginnings. 3 days passed before they came back. Ilara was learning the rhythm of the valley, how the morning light crept down the eastern ridge in slow increments, how the wind shifted direction around noon, how the temperature could drop 15 degrees in an hour when clouds moved in. She was learning Rowan too, the way he moved through his days with quiet purpose, wasting nothing, saying only what needed saying. He'd started teaching her to shoot that second morning. The Winchester kicked harder than she'd expected, the stock bruising her shoulder even when she held it right. Her first dozen shots missed the target completely, a circle carved into a pine trunk about 50 yards from the cabin. "You're thinking too much," Rowan said, standing behind her. "Don't aim. Look." "That doesn't make sense." "Does to your body. Try again." She did. The bullet went wide, splintering bark 3 feet left of the target. Rowan didn't sigh, didn't show frustration. He just adjusted her stance, moved her elbow a fraction of an inch, reminded her to breathe out as she squeezed the trigger. The 13th shot hit the outer edge of the circle. "There," he said, and she heard genuine satisfaction in his voice. "Do it again." By the end of that session, her shoulder ached and her ears rang despite the cotton wadding Rowan had given her, but she'd hit the target 6 more times. Progress, he'd called it. Survival, she'd thought. Now on the 3rd afternoon, she was attempting to repair one of Rowan's shirts, a simple tear in the shoulder seam that should have taken her 15 minutes. It was taking closer to an hour because her hands kept shaking. Not from fear. From the steady, low-grade anxiety that came from knowing Dalton and Webb had seen this valley, knew how to find it, had the knowledge needed to come back. She was threading her needle for the 4th time when Storm whinnied from the stable. It wasn't his normal sound. This was sharp, warning. Rowan appeared in the doorway from outside, where he'd been splitting wood. He held the axe loosely in one hand, head tilted, listening. "Company," he said. Ilara set down the shirt, her pulse already accelerating. "The same ones?" "Don't know yet." He propped the axe against the doorframe and moved to the window, angling himself so he could see the pass without being easily visible from outside. "Storm doesn't like whoever it is." The minutes crawled. Ilara stood frozen by the table, unsure whether to hide, run, or stand her ground. This was the problem with choosing the valley. There was nowhere to run to. They were trapped by the same geography that made this place safe. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses moving at a walk, careful and deliberate. Rowan's jaw tightened. 3 riders. Dalton's in front. Who else? Can't tell yet. They're staying in the tree line. He moved away from the window and went to the corner where he kept the Winchester. Checked the load, chambered around. "Stay inside. Whatever happens, stay inside until I tell you different." "Rowan, I mean it, Ilara." He looked at her and his eyes were hard. "These men don't get to see you, don't get to talk to you. This is between them and me." He walked out before she could argue. Ilara moved to the window, her heart hammering. From here, she could see Rowan position himself in front of the cabin, the rifle held across his body in a way that wasn't quite threatening but wasn't friendly either. Storm continued his nervous pacing in the stable, hooves striking the ground in agitated rhythm. The riders emerged from the trees. Dalton led, sitting his horse with the easy confidence of someone who'd never had to fear consequences. Behind him rode Webb, still wearing his deputy's badge. And bringing up the rear was a third man Ilara didn't recognize at first. Older, gray-bearded, wearing a heavy coat that had seen better days. Then he shifted in his saddle and lamplight from the cabin caught his face. Silas Reeves. Dalton's father. Ilara's stomach dropped. Silas owned half of Bitter Hollow outright and controlled most of the rest through debts and favors. He was the kind of man who smiled when he ruined you, who saw kindness as weakness and mercy as waste. If he'd come all the way up to the valley, this wasn't a welfare check. This was something else.
The three men reined in about 40 feet from where Rowan stood, close enough to talk without shouting, far enough to make a quick escape if needed. "Mr. Hale!" Silas's voice carried across the clearing, rough from years of whiskey and shouting orders. "We meet at last." Rowan said nothing. "I'm Silas Reeves. I believe you've met my son Dalton." Silas dismounted slowly, his movements stiff. Old injury maybe, or just the weight of years. "And Deputy Morrison, of course." "I remember," Rowan said flatly. "Good, good." Silas walked forward a few steps, hands visible and empty, trying to appear non-threatening. "Then you'll understand this is official business. The mayor asked me to accompany the deputy on this visit, given the irregular nature of your claim to Miss Vance." "Mrs. Hale," Rowan corrected. "Ah, yes, about that." Silas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "See, we've been looking into the ceremony records very carefully, and it appears there were several irregularities in your selection that may invalidate the ribbon bond." Alara pressed closer to the window, straining to hear. "What irregularities?" Rowan asked. "Well, for one, you're not a resident of Bitter Hollow, never have been. The ceremony is meant for community members to form bonds within the community." Silas clasped his hands behind his back, the picture of reasonable authority. "For another, you didn't complete the registration process. No signed documents, no witness contract, no payment of the bonding fee." "There's a fee? $5. Standard for all ceremonies." Silas shrugged apologetically. "Without it, the bond isn't legal. Not according to Bitter Hollow law, anyway." Rowan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "So you rode 3 hours into the mountains to tell me I owe you $5? "Not exactly." Silas glanced back at Dalton, some signal passing between father and son. "We rode up here to offer a solution. You see, the mayor feels, and I agree, that Miss Vance may not have fully understood what she was agreeing to when she accepted your ribbon. The ceremony happened very quickly in an emotionally charged atmosphere. She may have acted rashly." "She's standing right inside," Rowan said. "She can hear every word you're saying." "Even better." Silas raised his voice slightly. "Alara, honey, we're not here to force you to do anything. We just want to make sure you have all the information before you make a permanent decision. This valley is isolated, dangerous, winter's coming. You'd be completely dependent on Mr. Hale for survival, and frankly, we don't know enough about him to trust that." Alara's hands clenched into fists. The presumption of it, the assumption that she needed their protection, their guidance, their permission to make choices about her own life. "What's your solution?" Rowan asked, his voice tight. "Come back to Bitter Hollow," Silas said simply. "Both of you, if you like. We'll hold a proper ceremony with all the correct procedures. If Alara still chooses you after that, with a clear head and proper counsel, then we'll recognize the bond. No arguments, no interference." "And if she doesn't choose him?" Webb spoke up from his horse. "What happens to her then?" "She goes back to her room above the general store," Silas said.
Resumes her work, lives her life, same as before. Same as before. The words hit Alara like cold water, the lonely room, the pitying looks, the endless ceremonies where she sat, unchosen year after year. The future she'd escaped 3 days ago, offered back to her like a gift. Rowan must have sensed her reaction because he shifted slightly, angling himself to block more of the cabin from view. "That's not happening." "Mr. Hale?" Alara made her choice. The ribbon's tied. By your own ceremony rules, that makes the bond legal for 1 year regardless of paperwork. The rules also allow for annulment in cases of coercion or fraud, Silas countered. And I think a case could be made that you misrepresented yourself. "What do you do for money, Mr. Hale? How do you support yourself up here?" "Trapping, furs. And in winter, when the animals are scarce and the passes are snowed in?" "What then?" Silas spread his hands. "You're asking a woman to risk her life on your ability to provide, and we have no evidence you can do that. It's irresponsible, dangerous." "She's not your concern anymore," Rowan said. "She's a member of our community. She was never part of your community. You made sure of that." Rowan's voice went hard. "I've heard the stories. 7 years of rejection. 7 years of being the town charity case, the cautionary tale. You didn't care about her well-being then.
You don't get to pretend you care now. Dalton dismounted, unable to keep quiet any longer. You don't know anything about us, about what Bitter Hollow is. We take care of our own. By humiliating them? Rowan turned to face Dalton directly. By making sure
This
everyone
story
knows
was
their
posted
place.
on the channel West
She had a
of
place,
Betrayal.
Dalton shot
Please
back.
do not
A safe
repost
place
it
with
in any
people who
form.
knew her, who what? Who pitied her? Who talked about her like she was broken? Rowan took a step forward, and something in the movement made all three men tense. Alara's not broken. She's the strongest person in your entire town, and none of you saw it because you were too busy looking at her scar. This is pointless, Silas interjected, his patience clearly wearing thin. We're not here to debate philosophy. We're here on legal grounds. The ceremony bond is invalid. Miss Vance needs to return to Bitter Hollow for a proper selection. No, Rowan said. Then we'll have to involve the territorial marshal. Do it. Rowan raised the rifle slightly, not pointing it at anyone but making its presence more obvious. Ride to the territorial office. File your complaint. Tell them a woman chose to leave your town with a man who offered her a better life. See how much they care. The clearing went silent, except for the wind moving through the pines and Storm's continued nervous shuffling. Silas's expression hardened. You're making a mistake, Mr. Hale. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. And what about Alara's mistakes? Dalton demanded. Dalton. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's scared, confused. The cabin door opened. Alara stepped out onto the porch, still wearing one of Rowan's old shirts over her dress because the mountain cold had a way of seeping through everything. Her hair was tied back with a piece of leather cord. She held Rowan's torn shirt in one hand, the needle and thread still dangling from it. 3 pairs of eyes turned to her. I'm not confused, she said clearly. And I'm not scared. Not of this, anyway. Alara, Silas began. You didn't ride 3 hours to check on me, she continued, walking to stand beside Rowan. You rode up here because Dalton's embarrassed. Because for once, someone chose me instead of rejecting me, and it made him look bad in front of the whole town. Dalton's face flushed. That's not... It is. Alara looked at him directly, meeting his eyes for the first time in years. You've spent 7 years making sure I knew exactly what you thought of me, what everyone thought, that I was damaged, used up, not worth choosing, and then Rowan walked into that hall and proved you wrong. He's a stranger, Dalton said, almost pleading now. You don't know him. I didn't know anyone in Bitter Hollow either, not really. Alara felt Rowan shift slightly beside her, his presence solid and steady. They knew my story, knew about the fire, about my family. But nobody knew me. Nobody tried to know me. That's not fair. It's completely fair. Her voice stayed level, calm. I lived in that town for 15 years after the fire. 15 years, Dalton. And in all that time, the only person who ever asked what I wanted, what I thought, what I needed, was standing right here. A stranger who saw me sitting in that hall and decided I was worth choosing. Silas tried a different approach. Alara, honey, you're young. You don't understand what you're giving up. Civilization, safety, community. I understand exactly what I'm giving up, Alara said. I'm giving up a room I could barely afford, work that paid just enough to survive, and the privilege of being pitied by people who would never actually help me. In exchange, I get this valley, this life, the chance to be someone other than the burnt girl. And what happens when winter comes? Webb asked. When you're trapped up here for months with no way out? When the food runs low or you get sick or... Then we deal with it, Alara said simply. Same as we'll deal with everything else. She was surprised by how much she meant it. 3 days ago, she would have been terrified by the scenarios Webb was painting. Now, standing beside Rowan with the valley spread out behind her, those fears seemed smaller, manageable. Silas studied her for a long moment, his shrewd eyes taking in every detail. Finally, he nodded slowly. I see, he said. You've made up your mind. I have. Then I suppose there's nothing more to say. He walked back to his horse, moving with that same stiff gait. But understand this, both of you, Bitter Hollow is withdrawing its protection. If something happens up here, if you need help, don't expect us to come running. We won't, Rowan said. Silas mounted with Webb's help, settling into his saddle with a grimace. Dalton was the last to remount, his face still red, his hands shaking with suppressed anger. You'll regret this, he said to Alara. When the reality sets in, when you realize what you've traded away. I already know what I traded away, Alara interrupted. The question is, do you know what you lost? Dalton stared at her, uncomprehending. You lost the chance to be the bigger man, she continued. 7 years, you could have chosen kindness, could have defended me or at least left me alone. Instead, you chose cruelty. And now you're here trying to take back a choice you never had the courage to make yourself. She saw it hit him, the truth of it, the way his whole body flinched like she'd struck him. Then he yanked his horse's head around and kicked it into motion. Webb followed immediately. Silas lingered for just a moment longer. Take care of her, he said to Rowan. Not a request, a command. I intend to. See that you do, because if she comes to harm up here, if anything happens that could have been prevented. Silas let the threat hang unfinished. Then he too turned his horse and followed his son back toward the pass. Rowan and Alara stood together, watching until the 3 riders disappeared into the tree line. The hoofbeats faded. The valley returned to its usual quiet, broken only by Storm's relieved snort from the stable. That was stupid, Rowan said finally. Coming out here, they could have what? Alara turned to look at him. They weren't going to hurt me, and I wasn't going to hide inside while they tried to decide my future for me. Still stupid, probably. She looked down at the shirt in her hands. At the needle and thread she'd been clutching so hard the thread had cut into her palm. But I'm tired of being smart in ways that make me small. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he did something unexpected. He laughed. It was a rough sound, unpracticed, but genuine. Fair enough, he said. Come on. Let's get inside before they change their minds and come back. They returned to the cabin. Alara's hands were shaking now, adrenaline finally catching up with her. She sat at the table and tried to resume her sewing, but the needle kept slipping. Rowan made coffee, strong and bitter, and pushed a cup into her hands. Drink, he said. She did. The heat helped, grounding her back and her body. They'll try again, Rowan said, settling into the chair across from her. Maybe not Dalton, but Silas doesn't like losing. He'll find another angle. Let him try. Alara took another sip of coffee. I meant what I said. I'm done with Bitter Hollow. Even if winter's as hard as they warned, even then. She met his eyes. I'm not going back to that room, to that life. I'd rather freeze up here than suffocate down there. Rowan studied her face, and she let him look. Let him see the scar, the determination, the fear she was trying very hard not to show. All right, he said finally. Then we better make sure you don't freeze. The rest of that day they worked. Rowan showed Alara how to stack firewood so it would dry properly, how to check the chimney for blockages, how to identify which clouds meant snow was coming, practical things, survival things. She was exhausted by the time darkness fell, her muscles aching from unfamiliar labor. But it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from building something instead of just enduring. That night, after a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, Rowan pulled one of the books from his shelf. You said you'd read to me, he reminded her. Alara took the book. It was old, the leather cover worn smooth, the pages yellowed, a collection of folk tales from some country she'd never heard of. Where did you get this? She asked. Belonged to the man who owned this valley before me. Found it in the cabin when I bought the land. Rowan settled back in his chair. Never knew what the stories were about. Alara opened to the first page and began to read. Her voice was rusty at first, stumbling over unfamiliar names and archaic phrasing, but Rowan didn't seem to mind. He sat with his eyes half closed, listening with the kind of attention most people reserved for important news. She read for an hour, until her throat was dry and her eyes burned. When she finally stopped, Rowan was smiling. That was good, he said quietly. Thank you. We can do it again tomorrow, Alara offered. If you want. I'd like that. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling, the valley settling into night around them. Rowan, Alara said eventually, earlier, when you told Silas I was the strongest person in Bitter Hollow, did you mean that?
He looked at her, and his expression was serious. Yeah, I meant it. How could you tell? You barely know me. I know enough. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Strength isn't about not being afraid, Alara. It's about being afraid and doing the thing anyway. You've been doing that for 15 years. That's more
This story
courage
was
than most
posted
people
on the
show in a
channel
lifetime.
West of Betrayal.
She wanted to
Please
believe
do not
him,
repost
wanted
it
to
in
see
any
herself
form.
the way he seemed to see her. What if I'm not strong enough? The question came out small. What if winter comes and I can't handle it? Then you learn to handle it, Rowan said simply. That's what strength is. Not being perfect, just refusing to quit. He stood and stretched, his joints popping. Get some sleep. Tomorrow I want to show you the trap lines before the weather turns. Rowan? He paused at the base of the ladder to the loft. Thank you, she said, for choosing me, for seeing something worth choosing. You don't have to thank me for that, he said. It was the easiest decision I ever made. He climbed to the loft, and Alara heard him settling in, the familiar creaks and rustles. She prepared for bed slowly, changing into the nightdress she'd brought from Bitter Hollow, banking the fire so it would last through the night. The cabin was warm, secure, safe. But as she lay in the darkness, her mind kept returning to Dalton's face. The shock in his eyes when she'd called him out. The way he'd flinched when she'd asked if he knew what he'd lost. She hadn't meant to hurt him, hadn't even been trying to. She'd just been telling the truth. Maybe that was the same thing. Outside, the valley was silent except for the usual night sounds. No hoofbeats, no voices, no one coming to drag her back to a life she'd never wanted. Alara pulled the furs up to her chin and let herself believe just for tonight that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The dream came just before dawn. Fire. Always fire. The familiar nightmare. Her childhood home burning, the beams collapsing, her mother screaming somewhere in the smoke. But this time, when Alara looked up from where the beam had trapped her, she saw Rowan standing in the doorway. He reached for her, his hand outstretched. She tried to take it, but her arm wouldn't move. The fire grew hotter, closer. Rowan's face began to melt, the scar on his temple splitting open. She woke gasping, her nightdress soaked with sweat. Gray light filtered through the windows. Dawn. She'd slept maybe 4 hours. Above her in the loft, she heard Rowan moving. He climbed down the ladder and stopped when he saw her sitting up, clearly distressed. Bad dream? He asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He went to the stove and started building up the fire from the coals, giving her time to compose herself. When he spoke again, his back was still turned. I get them too sometimes, he said. Dreams about things that already happened, things that might happen. They're worse than the regular kind because they feel real. How do you make them stop? You don't. He filled the kettle and set it on the stove. You just learn to wake up from them and remember they're not actually happening. Not right now, anyway. It wasn't the comfort she'd hoped for, but it was honest, and somehow that helped more than empty reassurance would have. By the time the sun fully rose, they were both dressed and ready to face the day. Rowan packed supplies for checking the trap lines. Rope, extra traps, a skinning knife, the rifle. Stay close, he told Alara as they headed out. The forest can be disorienting if you don't know the markers. She followed him into the trees, matching his pace, learning to step where he stepped. The morning was cold, her breath visible in white puffs, but the movement kept her warm. Rowan's trap line covered maybe 3 miles, looping through the forest in a careful pattern he'd clearly established over years. At each trap, he stopped to check for catches, reset springs, repair damage from weather or scavengers. This is how I make my living, he explained at the 4th trap, which held a marten. The animal was already dead, killed instantly by the trap's mechanism. Furs bring good money in the settlements. Fox, marten, beaver, sometimes wolf if I'm lucky. He showed her how to release the trap, how to skin the animal efficiently, how to reset everything for the next catch. His hands moved with practiced skill, wasting nothing. Alara watched closely, trying not to show how the blood bothered her. This was survival. This was the price of living in the valley. They were at the 7th trap when Storm's warning whinny echoed through the forest. Rowan's head snapped up. That's back at the cabin. They looked at each other. Run, Rowan said. They ran. They burst through the tree line at a dead sprint, Rowan slightly ahead with the rifle in hand.
Alara's lungs burned from the altitude and exertion, but she kept pace, her eyes fixed on the cabin clearing. 2 horses stood tethered near the porch, not the same ones from yesterday. These were working animals, heavy-boned and trail-worn. And standing by Storm's stable, attempting to calm the agitated stallion, was Dalton, alone. Rowan slowed, his breathing controlled despite the run. He raised the rifle to his shoulder in one smooth motion, sighting down the barrel at Dalton's chest. "Get away from my horse," he said. Dalton stepped back immediately, hands rising to shoulder height. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "Then why are you here at all?" Rowan didn't lower the rifle. "Your father made it pretty clear yesterday. Bitter Hollow's done with us." "My father doesn't speak for me." Dalton's voice was rough, strained. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw shadowed with stubble, his expensive coat wrinkled like he'd been wearing it for days. Alara moved to stand beside Rowan, her hand instinctively going to the knife at her belt. Rowan had given it to her that first morning, a simple skinning blade in a leather sheath. She'd never used it on anything but rope and the occasional stubborn knot, but having it made her feel less helpless. "What do you want?" she asked. Dalton looked at her, and something in his expression made her uncomfortable. Not anger, not contempt. Something worse. Regret. "I wanted to apologize," he said. "For yesterday. For all of it, really. The ceremony, the things I said, the years of—" He stopped, struggling with words. "I was cruel. Unnecessarily cruel. And I'm sorry." The silence that followed was broken only by Storm's nervous shuffling and the wind moving through the pines. Rowan didn't lower the rifle. "You rode 3 hours to say you're sorry?" "I rode 3 hours because Webb and I are coming back tonight." Dalton's hands were still raised, his posture non-threatening. "Official business this time, real official business, not my father's games." "Explain," Rowan said flatly. Dalton glanced between them, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "There's a claim dispute. Someone filed paperwork in the territorial office saying this valley was promised to them 5 years ago, before you allegedly bought it. The marshal's office sent a writ. Webb and I have to serve it and escort you both to a hearing in 3 days." Alara felt her stomach drop. "That's a lie. This valley is Rowan's. He bought it legally." "Maybe he did," Dalton said, "but the claim has to be investigated regardless. That's the law." "Who filed the claim?" Rowan asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Dalton hesitated. "I don't know. The paperwork was filed anonymously through a lawyer in Denver. But whoever it is, they have documentation. Survey maps, original grant deeds, witness statements. It's legitimate enough that the marshal had to act." "Your father," Rowan said, "this is Silas's doing." "I don't know that for certain, but you suspect it." Dalton's silence was answer enough. Rowan finally lowered the rifle, but he didn't put it down. "When are you coming back?" "Sundown, maybe a little after." Dalton looked genuinely uncomfortable now. "I tried to buy you more time, but Webb's following the writ to the letter. We have to serve it today, and you have to appear at the hearing, or you forfeit any claim to the land." "And if we refuse to go?" "Then the marshal will send rangers, and they won't be as polite as Webb and me." Dalton's hands finally lowered. "Look, I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm telling you this as a warning, not a threat. My father wants this valley. I don't know why, but he does. And when Silas Reeves wants something, he usually finds a way to get it." "Not this time," Rowan said. "Then you better have your deed and any other documentation ready to show the hearing officer, because my father will have lawyers, witnesses, and every advantage money can buy." Dalton moved toward his horses. 2 of them, Alara noticed now. "I brought a spare mount. Figured if you need to ride to the territorial office, you'd need one for Alara." "We don't need your charity," Alara said sharply. "It's not charity, it's—" Dalton struggled again, that same uncomfortable regret crossing his face. "Call it restitution, for 7 years of being a bastard." He untied both horses and led them toward the cabin hitching post. Storm watched with suspicion, but didn't try to interfere. "There's food in the saddlebags," Dalton continued. "Trail rations, dried meat, some jerky, and a map to the territorial office if you don't know the way. It's about 2 days' ride southeast." "Why are you doing this?" Alara asked.
The question came out harsher than she'd intended, but she needed to understand. This wasn't the Dalton she'd known in Bitter Hollow. That man had been cruel, dismissive, small. This version seemed almost human.
This story was posted on the channel west of Betrayal.
Back.
Please do not repost
Because
it
you were
in any
right.
form.
What you said yesterday about losing the chance to be the bigger man, you were right. I've spent my whole life being Silas Reeves's son, living up to his reputation, doing what he expected, and somewhere along the way, I forgot how to be decent. So now you want redemption, Rowan said, his tone skeptical. No, I don't think there's redemption for the things I've done. Dalton looked at Alara directly. But maybe I can keep you from losing everything because of my father's greed. That's something, anyway. He moved toward his own horse, a third animal that had been standing quiet in the shadows. As he mounted, he looked back one more time. We'll be here at sundown, he said, with the writ. What you do between now and then is your choice. But if you run, my father wins. He gets the valley by default. We're not running, Rowan said. Dalton nodded slowly. Didn't think you were. But I had to give you the option. He turned his horse and rode back toward the pass, disappearing into the trees. Alara and Rowan stood in silence, watching him go. That was strange, Alara said finally. That was a trap, Rowan corrected. He lowered the rifle completely now, his shoulders tight with tension. Dalton shows up alone, apologetic, bearing gifts, warns us about the writ so we have time to prepare. Makes himself look like the reasonable one. You think he's working with his father? I think Silas Reeves doesn't make moves without knowing every piece on the board. Rowan walked to the spare horses, checking their tack, examining the saddlebags. This could be genuine. Dalton could be trying to make amends. Or this could be theater designed to make us trust him right before something worse happens. He pulled a leather document case from one of the saddlebags and opened it. Inside was exactly what Dalton had promised. A detailed map to the territorial office, marked with water sources and safe camping spots. Too convenient, Rowan muttered. Or maybe he's telling the truth, Alara said. Maybe your father really did file a false claim and Dalton's caught in the middle. Maybe. Rowan closed the case and looked at her. Either way, we have a decision to make. Do we go to this hearing and try to fight it legally, or do we assume it's rigged and find another option? What other option is there? We could disappear. Take what we can carry, leave the valley, head north into territory where Silas has no influence. He said it calmly, like he was discussing the weather. Start over somewhere else. Alara felt something fierce rise in her chest. No. Alara, no, she said again, stronger this time. I didn't leave Bitter Hollow just to spend the rest of my life running. This valley is yours. You bought it, you built the cabin, you made a life here. We're not letting Silas Reeves steal it because he's angry his son got shown up at a ribbon ceremony. It might not be about the ceremony, Rowan said. This valley could be worth something I don't know about. Mineral rights, timber, water access. Silas doesn't move unless there's profit involved. Then we find out what he knows and we fight him for it. Alara moved closer, forcing Rowan to look at her. You told me strength was refusing to quit, so let's not quit. Rowan studied her face, and she watched something shift in his expression. Pride, maybe. Or approval. All right, he said. Then we go to the hearing, but we go prepared. The rest of the day became a study in controlled urgency. Rowan retrieved his deed from a locked metal box he kept buried under the cabin floor. Proof of purchase, signed and witnessed, dated
This story
3
was
years
posted
prior.
on the channel
He
west
also
of
pulled out a
Betrayal.
leather journal
Please
filled
do
with
not
meticulous
repost it
records
in
of
any form.
improvements made to the property, expenses incurred, furs sold, income earned, evidence of occupation and investment. My father taught me to keep records, he explained, flipping through pages of careful handwriting. Said a man who can't prove what he owns doesn't own anything. Alara helped him organize the documents, creating a timeline that showed continuous occupation since purchase. It was solid, thorough, the kind of evidence that should win any legitimate dispute, which meant the dispute probably wasn't legitimate. If this goes to a hearing, they'll have fabricated something, Rowan said, echoing her thoughts. False witnesses claiming they saw someone else here first, forged documents predating my deed. The question is how well they fabricated it. Wait, can we get our own witnesses? Alara asked. People who knew you bought this land? The man I bought from is dead. That's why it was available. His widow wanted cash, not wilderness property. She moved back east 3 years ago. No idea where she is now. What about people who've seen you here? Traders? Other trappers? I keep to myself. That's the whole point of living up here. Rowan closed the journal. We're going into this hearing with documentation but no witnesses, against Silas Reeves, who probably has both. The afternoon sun was slanting through the western windows when Rowan made a decision. We need insurance, he said. What kind of insurance? He went to the corner and retrieved a small canvas bag Alara had never seen before. From it, he pulled 3 doeskin pouches, each heavy with something that clinked. Gold, he said, opening one to show her. 3 years of profits from the trap lines. I've been saving it for, I don't know what. Emergencies, expansion, future needs. How much? About $2,000 worth. He set the pouches on the table. Enough to hire a real lawyer if we need one. Enough to bribe officials if it comes to that. Enough to disappear and start over if everything goes wrong. $2,000. Alara had never seen that much money in her life. In Bitter Hollow, she'd made maybe $60 a year from sewing. Where did you plan to hide it during the hearing? She asked. I wasn't planning to hide it. I was planning to carry it. He looked at her seriously. If we're going to fight Silas Reeves, we need resources. This is what we have. That night, they prepared like soldiers before battle. Rowan cleaned and oiled both rifles, checked ammunition stores, sharpened knives. Alara packed food, spare clothes, the essential documents. They worked in companionable silence, the weight of what was coming pressing down on both of them. What if we lose? Alara asked as darkness fell outside. Rowan paused in his work, a cleaning rod halfway down the Winchester's barrel. Then we lose the valley. But we don't lose each other. That's what matters. Is it? Yeah. He resumed cleaning, his movements methodical. I can find another valley, build another cabin, start another life. But finding someone like you, someone who doesn't break, who stands their ground when it matters, that's rare. That's worth protecting. Alara felt warmth spread through her chest, pushing back the cold fear that had been building all day. I'm not that special, Rowan. You stood on that porch and told Silas Reeves to his face that you were done with Bitter Hollow. You think that's common? He looked at her over the rifle. Most people can't do that. They talk about change, about leaving, about starting over. But when it comes time to actually do it, they stay in their safe, miserable lives. You didn't. You chose the unknown over the familiar. That takes something most people don't have. Before Alara could respond, hoofbeats echoed across the valley. They both moved to the windows. The sun had just set, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange, and riding through the fading light were 2 figures on horseback, Dalton and Webb, right on schedule. Rowan grabbed the rifle and headed for the door. Alara followed, her hand on her belt knife. The 2 men reined in at the same distance as yesterday, maintaining the careful buffer zone that had become habit. Dalton looked exhausted. Webb looked grim. We're here to serve the writ, Webb called out, his voice formal and uncomfortable. Serve it then, Rowan said. Webb dismounted and approached slowly, holding a rolled piece of paper sealed with red wax. When he was within arm's reach, he stopped. This is an official summons from the Territorial Land Office, he said, reading from memory. You are required to appear at a hearing 3 days hence to contest a claim filed against your deed to this property. Failure to appear will result in forfeiture of all rights and ownership. He held out the paper. Rowan took it, broke the seal, and scanned the contents. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The hearing is in Cascade Ridge, Webb continued. That's about 50 miles southeast. You'll need to be there by noon on the 3rd day. Who filed the claim? Rowan asked, still reading. It doesn't say. Filed through a proxy lawyer. Webb shifted uncomfortably. Look, I don't like this any more than you do, but it's legal and it's official. You have to respond. We'll be there, Rowan said. Dalton spoke up from his horse. You should know, my father left for Cascade Ridge this morning. He's already there, probably meeting with the hearing officer as we speak. Of course he is, Rowan muttered. I'm coming too, Dalton said. To the hearing, as a witness if you need one. A witness to what? Alara asked.
You've never been to this valley before 3 days ago.
This story
No,
was
but I can
posted on the
testify
channel
to what
west
happened
of
at the ribbon
Betrayal.
ceremony.
Please do not
To the fact that
repost
my
it
father
in any
opposed your
form.
union from the start. To his character and methods. Dalton's expression was earnest in the dimming light. It's not much, but it might help establish his motive for filing a false claim. Or it might be exactly what he wants, Rowan said. You showing up to play the repentant son, making us think we have an ally, right before you turn on us when it matters most. I understand why you'd think that, Dalton said quietly. I've earned that suspicion, but I'm telling you the truth. I want to help. My father has done a lot of things I'm not proud of, but this is different. This is theft dressed up as law, and I won't be part of it. Webb cleared his throat. For what it's worth, I believe him. Dalton and Silas had a hell of a fight after we got back from here yesterday. Half the town heard it. Dalton called his father a petty tyrant. Silas threatened to disown him. It was ugly. So Dalton's rebelling against Daddy, Rowan said, but that doesn't make him trustworthy. No, Webb agreed, but it makes him honest about this at least. He's risking a lot by going against Silas. The four of them stood in the gathering darkness, measuring each other across the divide of history and suspicion. Finally, Rowan folded the writ and tucked it into his coat. We leave at dawn. If you want to ride with us, be here by first light. If you're not here, we go without you. I'll be here, Dalton said. Don't make me regret this, Rowan warned. Webb mounted his horse, clearly eager to leave. 3 days, noon, don't be late. The two men turned and rode back toward Bitter Hollow, their forms disappearing into the blue dusk. Alara and Rowan went back inside. The cabin felt smaller somehow, the walls pressing in with the weight of what they'd just learned. Do you trust him? Alara asked. Dalton? No? Rowan lit a lantern, pushing back the shadows. But I trust that he's angry at his father, and angry people make mistakes. Maybe we can use that. They ate a cold dinner, neither feeling much like cooking. The writ sat on the table between them, its official seals and formal language a threat wrapped in legal paper. What if Silas has already bribed the hearing officer? Alara asked. What if it's decided before we even get there? Then we make enough noise that other officials notice, file our own complaints, appeal to the territorial governor if we have to. Rowan pushed food around his plate without eating it. The law might be corrupt, but it's not completely broken. There are still people who care about justice. You sound like you're trying to convince yourself. Maybe I am. He set down his fork. I've lived my whole life avoiding towns, officials, lawyers, all the people who complicate things. Out here the rules are simple. You work hard, you survive, you slack off, you die. Clean, clear, no games. And now we have to play the games anyway, Alara finished. Yeah. They sat in silence for a while, the lantern casting dancing shadows on the walls. I'm scared, Alara admitted quietly. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Rowan finally met her eyes. But don't let it paralyze you. Tomorrow we ride to Cascade Ridge. We present our case. We fight for what's ours. And if we lose, we don't lose, Alara interrupted. I didn't choose this valley just to hand it over to Silas Reeves. Something fierce sparked in Rowan's expression. No, I guess you didn't. They stayed up late that night, going over their documentation again and again, looking for weaknesses Silas might exploit. Alara read passages from the deed aloud, making sure she understood every clause.
This story was posted on the channel west of Betrayal. Please do not
how to answer
repost
questions
it in any
without
form.
volunteering too much information. The key is confidence, he said. Even if you're terrified inside, you can't show it. Men like Silas feed on weakness. The moment they think they can intimidate you, they've already won. How do I show confidence when I don't feel it? You fake it, shoulders back, voice steady, eye contact. He demonstrated, his posture shifting from relaxed to commanding in an instant. And you remember something important. You survived a fire that killed your entire family. You survived 15 years of being Bitter Hollow's charity case. You survived 7 ribbon ceremonies designed to humiliate you. Silas Reeves is just another trial, and you've passed harder tests than him. Alara tried to absorb that confidence, to make it her own, but the fear kept creeping back, cold tendrils wrapping around her thoughts. What if they really did lose the valley? What if Silas's lawyers were too good, his bribes too effective,
His documentation too convincing? What if she and Rowan were forced back to Bitter Hollow? Or worse, forced to separate, the ribbon bond dissolved as illegal, everything they'd built together torn apart? "Stop," Rowan said, watching her face. "You're spiraling. I'm being realistic. You're borrowing trouble." He stood and walked to the bookshelf, pulling down the folktale collection. "Read to me. Something without fire or death or loss. Just a simple story." Alara took the book and flipped through pages until she found a tale about a clever fox who outwitted a hungry wolf. It was simple, almost childish, but Rowan listened with complete attention as she read. When she finished, he was smiling. "See? The small one won," he said, "not through strength, through being smarter and refusing to give up." "It's just a story, Rowan. All stories are just stories until they're not." He took the book and returned it to the shelf. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Alara prepared for bed, but sleep felt impossible. Her mind raced with scenarios, each one worse than the last. She lay in the darkness, listening to Rowan settle into the loft above her, and tried to find some measure of calm. "Alara?" His voice drifted down from above. "Yeah?" "Whatever happens at that hearing, we face it together. You're not alone in this." "I know." "Do you?" He shifted above her, the loft creaking. "Because I need you to really know it. Not just understand it intellectually, but feel it. You and me against whatever comes. That's the deal." "That's the deal," she echoed. "Good. Now sleep." She tried. Eventually, exhaustion won over anxiety, and she drifted into restless unconsciousness. The dream came again. Fire, smoke, her mother's screams. But this time when Rowan appeared in the doorway, his hand reaching for her, she managed to grab it. He pulled her from the flames, pulled her into cold mountain air, pulled her into safety. She woke before dawn to find Rowan already up, moving quietly around the cabin by lantern light. He'd packed their supplies, saddled all 3 horses, prepared everything for departure. "Coffee's ready," he said when he noticed her stirring. They drank in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The valley was still dark outside, the sun not yet clearing the eastern ridge. Hoofbeats approached just as gray light began filtering through the windows. Dalton, right on time. He looked even worse than yesterday, like he hadn't slept at all. But his eyes were clear and his voice was steady when he called out a greeting. Rowan stepped outside, and Alara followed. The morning air was cold enough to hurt, their breath coming out in white clouds. "Ready?" Dalton asked. "As we'll ever be," Rowan replied. They mounted up, Rowan on Storm, Alara on one of the horses Dalton had brought, Dalton on the third. The valley spread below them in the gathering light, beautiful and peaceful and home. Alara took one last look, memorizing the way the dawn light caught the river, the smoke rising from the cabin's chimney, the pine forest stretching toward the ridges. Then they turned their horses toward the pass and began the long ride to Cascade Ridge. The journey ate up 2 days of hard riding, camping rough both nights. Dalton proved useful despite Rowan's suspicions. He knew the trails, knew where to find water, knew how to read weather signs that warned of early snow. They didn't talk much. When they did, it was practical conversation about pace, rest stops, the horse's condition. Nobody mentioned Bitter Hollow or Silas or what was waiting for them in Cascade Ridge. On the second night, camped beside a creek that ran fast and cold from snowmelt, Dalton finally broke the carefully maintained silence. "I need to tell you something," he said. "About the hearing." Rowan looked up from the fire he was building. "What about it?" "My father didn't just file a false claim. He bought the hearing officer." Dalton stared into the flames. "I overheard him talking to his lawyer. They paid Judge Carmichael $500 to rule in Silas's favor, regardless of evidence." The words landed like stones thrown into still water. "How do you know this?" Rowan asked carefully. "Because I was supposed to deliver the bribe. My father gave me the money 2 weeks ago, told me to ride to Cascade Ridge and make the payment. Said it was for business, nothing I needed to worry about." Dalton's hands clenched into fists. "I didn't connect it to the valley until after we came back from serving the writ. Then I put it together." Did you deliver the money?" Alara asked. "Yes. Dalton looked at her and his expression was miserable. I delivered it before I knew what it was for, before I understood what my father was planning. By the time I realized, it was too late. So the hearing is already decided, Rowan said flatly. We're riding 2 days to a courtroom where we've already lost. Not necessarily. Dalton leaned forward. Judge Carmichael is corrupt, but he's also a coward. If enough people are watching, if there's enough attention on the case, he might not dare to rule against clear evidence. Bribes work best in the dark. Shine enough light, and they fall apart. How do we shine light? Alara asked. We make noise. We demand a public hearing, not a closed session. We invite every trapper, trader, and settler within riding distance to attend. We make sure everyone knows this is Silas Reeves trying to steal land from an honest man. Dalton's voice gained strength as he spoke.
My father's power comes from reputation, the belief that he's fair, that he follows rules, that he's a pillar of the community. If we can crack that reputation, if we can show people what he really is, the bribe won't be enough to save him. Rowan studied Dalton for a long moment. Why are you telling us this now? Why not 2 days ago? Because I needed to be sure, Dalton said. Sure that you weren't going to run, sure that you were serious about fighting, sure that you... He stopped, struggling with the words. Sure that you deserve to win. And? Rowan prompted. And you do. Dalton looked at both of them. You've worked for what you have. Built something real. My father's just trying to take it because he can, because someone dared to defy him at a ribbon ceremony. That's not justice. It's tyranny dressed up in legal paper. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks up into the night sky. If we do this, Rowan said slowly, if we make it public and loud, your father will know you betrayed him. There's no going back from that. I know. He'll disown you, cut you off. Maybe worse. I know that too. Dalton's jaw set in a hard line. I've spent 28 years being Silas Reeves's son. Maybe it's time I figured out who Dalton Reeves actually is. Alara felt something shift in her perception of the man across the fire. He was still the person who'd humiliated her 7 times. Still the heir to Bitter Hollow's cruelest dynasty. But maybe, just maybe, he was also someone trying to become better than his history. All right, Rowan said. We go loud. We make it public. We force Carmichael to rule on evidence, not bribes. There's one more thing, Dalton added. My father will have witnesses, false ones, but convincing. They'll claim they saw someone else occupying the valley before you bought it, that your deed is fraudulent. We need to be ready to discredit them. How? By knowing who they are before they testify. I can find out my father's lawyer isn't as careful as he thinks. If I can get the witness list, we might be able to find dirt on them, something that makes them unreliable. That's risky, Alara said. If your father catches you, he won't. Dalton stood, brushing dirt from his pants. We get to Cascade Ridge tomorrow afternoon. The hearing is the next day at noon. That gives me tonight to do some digging. They arrived in Cascade Ridge just as the sun touched the western mountains. It was bigger than Bitter Hollow, maybe 300 people, with an actual main street, a territorial courthouse, even a hotel with glass windows. They stabled the horses and took 2 rooms at the hotel, one for Rowan and Alara, one for Dalton. The desk clerk eyed them with open curiosity, clearly sensing drama. Big hearing tomorrow, he said conversationally as he handed over keys.
This story
Whole town's
was posted
talking
on
about
the
it.
channel west
Silas
of
Reeves
Betrayal.
versus some mountain
Please
man.
do not
Should be
repost
quite the
it in
show.
any form.
News travels fast, Rowan muttered. Mr. Reeves made sure of it, the clerk said with a knowing smile. Been buying drinks at the saloon, telling everyone how some squatter tried to steal land rightfully belonging to his business partner. Got half the town convinced you're a criminal before you even arrived. Rowan's expression darkened, but he said nothing. They took their keys and climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor. The room was small but clean, a real bed with a mattress, a wash basin, a window overlooking the street. Luxury compared to the cabin. Alara sank onto the bed, suddenly exhausted. 2 days of riding, the constant tension, the weight of tomorrow's hearing, it all crashed down at once. Rowan set their bags down and moved to the window, looking out at the street below. Silas has been busy. What do? We follow Dalton's plan.
Make it public, make it loud, force Carmichael to rule honestly. He turned from the window. And we trust that truth is stronger than lies. Is it? Alara asked quietly. In my experience, lies win more often than they should. Then we make sure this time is different. A knock on the door interrupted them. Dalton stood in the hallway, holding a piece of paper. Got the witness list, he said without preamble. 3 names. All of them longtime Silas associates. All of them with criminal records. He handed the paper to Rowan, who scanned it quickly. Jacob Thorne. Fraud. Marcus Black. Theft. Samuel Cooper. Assault. Rowan looked up. How did Silas convince a judge to accept witnesses with criminal backgrounds? Because that judge is already bought, Dalton said. He doesn't care about their credibility. The plan was always to rush through a closed hearing, take your valley, and deal with appeals later. Then we changed the plan, Rowan said. He handed the paper to Alara. Memorize these names. Tomorrow, when they testify, we're ready. That night, Alara couldn't sleep despite the comfortable bed. She lay beside Rowan in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of town life, voices from the saloon, horses passing on the street, the distant whistle of a train. Rowan? She whispered. Yeah? What if this doesn't work? What if Silas wins anyway? He rolled toward her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. Then we keep fighting, file appeals, bring in territorial authorities, make so much trouble that keeping the valley costs him more than it's worth. And if that doesn't work either? Then we find another valley, build another cabin, start again. His hand found hers in the darkness. The valley's important, Alara, but it's not everything. You are. This, he squeezed her hand, is what matters. As long as we have this, we can survive anything. She wanted to believe him, wanted to have his certainty, his confidence that they could overcome whatever Silas threw at them. Instead, she just held his hand and hoped it would be enough. Tomorrow would tell them if hope was currency or just another kind of lie. Morning came too fast and too slow at the same time. Alara woke to find Rowan already dressed, standing at the window with his arms crossed. The street below was busier than it had been last night. People moving with purpose, conversations drifting up through the glass. They're all talking about it, he said without turning. The hearing. Half the town's planning to attend. Is that good or bad? Depends on which half. He finally looked at her. Get dressed. We need to meet Dalton before the courthouse opens. They found him in the hotel dining room, nursing coffee that looked like it had gone cold an hour ago. His eyes were shadowed, his jaw tight. When they sat down, he pushed a folder across the table. Everything I could find on the witnesses, he said quietly. Thorne's been arrested twice for land fraud, selling deeds to property he didn't own. Black did 6 months for stealing timber from a competitor's claim, and Cooper beat a man half to death in a dispute over water rights. And Judge Carmichael accepted them as credible witnesses? Alara asked. Judge Carmichael accepted $500 to not ask questions, Dalton replied. But here's what matters. All 3 of them have been on my father's payroll at various times. Thorne manages one of his lumber operations. Black works security at the mining claims. Cooper's a foreman at the cattle ranch. Rowan flipped through the documents, his expression growing darker. So we can prove they're biased, that they're testifying because Silas pays them. We can try. But Carmichael might rule it irrelevant. Employees can still be credible witnesses. Dalton leaned back in his chair. The real problem is the documentation they'll present. My father's lawyer has created a complete paper trail showing someone else held claim to that valley 5 years ago. Survey maps, original grant applications, even sworn affidavits from settlers who supposedly witnessed the original occupation. All forgeries, Rowan said. Probably, but good ones. Dalton rubbed his eyes. We're going to need more than just discrediting witnesses. We need something that proves the entire claim is fraudulent. They sat in silence, the weight of impossibility pressing down on them. Then Alara remembered something. The widow, the woman you bought the land from, what was her name? Margaret Brennan, Rowan said. Why? Because if she's the one who sold you the valley, she must have proof of ownership going back before the time frame Silas is claiming. Original grant documents, inheritance papers, something. Alara looked between them. If we can prove the chain of ownership, we can show that nobody else had legal claim 5 years ago. She moved east 3 years ago, Rowan said. I don't even know what city. But the land office would have records of the sale, Dalton said, suddenly alert. Transfer documents, title searches, verification of ownership. It's all supposed to be on file. Can we get access before noon? Alara asked. Dalton checked his pocket watch. It's 7:30 now. The Territorial Land Office opens at 8. We've got maybe 3 hours before we need to be in the courtroom. They moved fast. The Territorial Land Office was a squat brick building 2 streets over, staffed by a clerk who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. When Rowan explained what they needed, the man sighed heavily. Property record search takes time, he said, especially for claims that old. Could take days. We don't have days, Rowan said. We have hours. Not my problem. The clerk started to turn away. Dalton stepped forward and placed a $20 gold piece on the counter. What if we made it worth your while? The clerk looked at the coin, then at Dalton, then back at the coin. What property are we searching? Valley claim, 3 years back. Seller was Margaret Brennan, widow of Thomas Brennan. Buyer was Rowan Hale. Dalton added another 20 to the pile. And we need everything, original grant, chain of ownership, any prior claims or disputes. The clerk pocketed the money and disappeared into the back room. They waited in the sparse front office, tension coiling tighter with each passing minute. Through the window, Alara could see people heading toward the courthouse, a steady stream of townspeople, drawn by spectacle and gossip. 30 minutes later, the clerk returned carrying a thick folder. Found it, he said, dropping it on the counter with a heavy thump. Brennan property, 60-acre valley claim. Granted to Thomas Brennan in 1848 by territorial authority, inherited by Margaret Brennan upon his death in 1851, sold to Rowan Hale in 1853. He opened the folder and pointed to various documents. Everything's in order, clean title, no disputes, no competing claims. What about before 1848? Dalton asked. Any record of prior occupation or claims? The clerk flipped through pages, squinting at faded handwriting. Nothing. The land was unclaimed wilderness until Thomas Brennan filed for it. First and only grant on that particular valley. Rowan leaned over the counter, scanning the documents. Can we get copies? Official copies with the land office seal? For another 20, sure. Dalton paid without hesitation. While the clerk worked on copying documents, Alara noticed something. One of the survey maps in the folder showed the valley boundaries, and they didn't match the maps in the fraudulent claim Silas had filed. Look, she said, pointing. The boundaries are different. Silas's claim shows a valley 3 miles west of yours. Same general area, but not the same land. Rowan compared the maps carefully. Either he made a mistake when forging the documents, or there really is another valley, and he's deliberately confusing them, Dalton finished, hoping nobody would check close enough to notice. Which means his entire claim is based on a geographical lie, Alara said. He's claiming ownership of a different piece of land and trying to apply it to yours. The clerk returned with freshly stamped copies of everything. Rowan gathered them carefully, his hands steady despite the adrenaline that must be coursing through him. This might actually work, he said quietly. They had 45 minutes before the hearing when they left the land office. The courthouse was already packed, every seat in the gallery filled, people standing along the walls, more crowding the hallway outside. Word had spread that Silas Reeves
was making a move. This story was posted on the channel
frontier
west
towns
of
love
Betrayal.
nothing more than public
Please
drama
do not
involving
repost
rich men
in any
and property
form.
disputes. Silas sat at the plaintiff's table with 2 lawyers in expensive suits, his expression calm and confident. When he saw Dalton enter with Rowan and Alara, something flickered across his face. Surprise, quickly masked. Dalton, he called out. I saved you a seat up front. I'm sitting with them, Dalton said, gesturing to Rowan and Alara. The courtroom went quiet. Every eye turned to watch father and son face each other across the aisle. Silas's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went hard. I see. You've chosen your side. I've chosen the truth, Dalton said, something you might try sometime. Before Silas could respond, a door at the front opened and Judge Carmichael entered, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a drinker's nose and calculating eyes. Everyone stood as he took the bench. Be seated, Carmichael said, banging his gavel once.
We're here for the matter of disputed land claim, Reeves versus Hale. This is an expedited hearing to determine rightful ownership of a valley property in the Northern Territory. Mr. Reeves, as the claimant, you'll present first. One of Silas's lawyers stood, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a voice like oil. Thank you, Your Honor. We'll demonstrate that our client's business associate held valid claim to the disputed valley beginning in 1851, predating Mr. Hale's purported purchase by 2 years. We have documentation, survey maps, and witness testimony to support this claim. He laid out the forged documents with practiced efficiency, explaining each one. The gallery murmured. It looked convincing. Official seals, aged paper, detailed surveys. Then the lawyer called his first witness. Jacob Thorne took the stand, sworn in, and began his testimony. He claimed to have personally witnessed a man named Richard Walsh occupying the valley in 1851, building a cabin, working the land. Said Walsh had shown him grant documents proving ownership. "And where is Mr. Walsh now?" the lawyer asked. "Dead, sir. Died in a mining accident 3 years back. His widow sold the claim to Mr. Reeves's associate, who in turn transferred it to Mr. Reeves. So you're saying Mr. Hale is occupying land that rightfully belongs to my client?" "Yes, sir. That's exactly what I'm saying." The lawyer thanked him and sat down. Judge Carmichael looked at Rowan. "Do you wish to cross-examine?" Rowan stood. He wasn't a lawyer, had probably never been in a courtroom before, but he moved to face Thorne with the same steady confidence he showed tracking game or reading weather. "Mr. Thorne," he said, "you claim to have seen Richard Walsh in that valley in 1851? "Yes." "Describe the valley. What did it look like?" Thorne hesitated. "It was a valley. Trees, a river, mountains on both sides." "Which side was the river on? North or south?" It's been years, I don't recall. Was there a waterfall?" "Maybe. I think so." "How many acres would you estimate?" "I don't know. 60, 70? Rowan walked back to the defense table and picked up the land office survey map. "According to this official survey from 1848, the valley you're describing doesn't exist. There's no waterfall in my valley. The river runs east-west, not north-south, and it's exactly 60 acres, not 70. He showed the map to the judge, then to the gallery. "Mr. Thorne," Rowan continued, "have you ever actually been to my valley?" Yes, I just said. Have you been there in the last 5 years?" Thorne's face flushed. "No, but have you ever been there at all?" Silence. "Answer the question," Judge Carmichael said. "No," Thorne admitted. "But Mr. Walsh described it to me in detail. So your entire testimony is based on second-hand description from a dead man about a valley you've never seen?" Rowan's voice cut through the courtroom. "And somehow that description doesn't match the actual geography?" Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The lawyer objected, but the damage was done. Rowan wasn't finished. "One more question, Mr. Thorne. Who pays your salary?" "I work for Reeves Timber. Who owns Reeves Timber?" "Mr. Silas Reeves." "So you're testifying in favor of the man who employs you, the man who could fire you if you said the wrong thing?" "Objection." The lawyer was on his feet. "Your Honor, the witness's employment is irrelevant." "I think the jury can decide relevance," Carmichael said, though he looked uncomfortable. The gallery was paying close attention now, and a judge who'd taken a bribe couldn't afford to look too obviously biased. Rowan sat down. Thorne was dismissed, his credibility in tatters. The next witness, Marcus Black, fared even worse. Under Rowan's questioning, he contradicted Thorne's description 3 times, got confused about dates, and finally admitted he'd never actually met Richard Walsh, just heard about him from other employees. By the time Samuel Cooper took the stand, the courtroom was openly skeptical. Cooper tried to stick to his script, but Dalton stood up during cross-examination. "Permission to question this witness, Your Honor?" he asked. Carmichael frowned. "You're not listed as counsel. I'm here as a witness myself, but I have relevant questions about Mr. Cooper's testimony." "Proceed," Carmichael said reluctantly. Dalton approached Cooper with the folder he'd prepared. "Mr. Cooper, you testified that you saw Richard Walsh in the disputed valley in 1851. Is that correct?" "Yes." That's interesting because according to territorial prison records, Dalton pulled out a document. You were incarcerated from January 1851 to November 1851 for assault. You were in prison the entire year you claimed to have seen Walsh in that valley. The courtroom erupted. Cooper's face went white. That was a different year. I got confused. The date is right here on your sworn testimony, 1851. The same year you were behind bars. Dalton looked at the judge. This man is committing perjury, Your Honor. Carmichael banged his gavel, calling for order, but the damage was catastrophic. Silas's lawyers were conferring frantically. In the gallery, people were shouting questions, demanding answers. Order, Carmichael bellowed. I'll have order or I'll clear this courtroom. The noise subsided, but the skepticism remained. Silas's lawyer stood, trying to salvage something. Your Honor, we request a recess to verify— Denied, Carmichael said. He looked trapped now, caught between his bribe and the very public destruction of the case. Do you have any other witnesses? No, Your Honor, but our documentation— Let's see this documentation, Carmichael said. Rowan stood again. Before we examine their documents, Your Honor, I'd like to present mine. He laid out the land office records, the original grant to Thomas Brennan, the inheritance by Margaret Brennan, the sale to Rowan Hale. All officially sealed, all dated, all in perfect chronological order. This is the complete chain of ownership for my valley, Rowan said clearly. From 1848 to present. There is no Richard Walsh. There is no prior claim. The land office records show my valley was unclaimed wilderness until Thomas Brennan filed for it in 1848, 5 years before I bought it. He then laid out the survey maps side by side, Silas's forged version and the official version. And here's the real problem with Mr. Reeves's claim, Rowan continued. The valley described in his documents isn't my valley. It's 3 miles west, different boundaries, different geography. Either his documentation is completely fraudulent, or he's trying to claim ownership of a different piece of land and apply it to mine. The courtroom was dead silent now. Carmichael studied the maps, his face going progressively redder. Whatever Silas had paid him, it wasn't worth this level of public humiliation. Mr. Reeves, he said slowly, can you explain this discrepancy? Silas stood, his composure finally cracking. My lawyers assured me the documentation was accurate. Your lawyers presented forged documents and perjured witnesses, Dalton said, standing beside Rowan. And you orchestrated the entire fraud to steal land from a man who embarrassed you at a ribbon ceremony. That's a lie, Silas's voice rose. I have every right to pursue valid claims. Except this isn't a valid claim, Rowan interrupted. This is revenge dressed up as law, and everyone in this room knows it. The gallery broke into chaos again, people shouting, arguing, some supporting Silas, more supporting Rowan. Carmichael banged his gavel repeatedly, but the situation was spiraling beyond his control. Finally, he roared, "Enough!" The room fell silent. Carmichael looked at the documents in front of him, at the ruined witnesses, at Silas's furious face and Rowan's steady calm. He was a corrupt judge, but he wasn't stupid. Whatever happened next would define his reputation in this town. Based on the evidence presented, he said slowly, I find that the plaintiff's claim lacks credibility. The witness testimony is unreliable. The documentation contains significant discrepancies, and the defendant has provided clear chain of title from official
territorial records. This story was posted
records.
on the channel west of Betrayal.
Your
Please
Honor,
do not repost
I'm not
it
finished.
in any form.
Carmichael's voice went hard. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the territorial marshal for investigation of potential fraud and perjury. Mr. Reeves, your claim is denied. Mr. Hale's ownership is upheld. He banged the gavel. This hearing is concluded. The courtroom exploded into noise, cheers from some quarters, outrage from others. Silas was already moving toward the door, his lawyers scrambling to follow. People crowded forward, wanting to shake Rowan's hand, congratulate him, ask questions. Alara stood frozen, barely believing what had just happened. They'd won. Against impossible odds, against corruption and money and power, they'd won. Dalton grabbed Rowan's arm. You need to leave. Now. What? My father's not going to accept this. He's humiliated, exposed, probably facing criminal investigation. Men like him don't go quietly.
Dalton was already pushing through the crowd toward the door. Get your horses, get out of town before he has time to regroup. They fought their way through the crowd, out of the courthouse, down the street toward the hotel. Behind them, they could hear arguments still raging, people picking sides, the town dividing itself into factions. They grabbed their bags from the hotel room, never unpacked, ready to go, and headed for the stable. Their horses were saddled and ready within minutes. As they led the animals into the street, Silas appeared with 4 men Elara didn't recognize. Hard-looking men with guns on their hips and no warmth in their eyes. "You think this is over?" Silas called out. "You think you've won?" "The judge ruled," Rowan said evenly. "The valley's mine. Legal and final." "Nothing's final until I say it is." Silas took a step forward, his face twisted with rage. "You humiliated me. Turned my own son against me. Made me look like a fool in front of the entire territory. That's not something I forgive." "Then don't forgive it," Rowan said. "Just accept it." The 4 hired men spread out, hands drifting toward their guns. The street was clearing, townspeople sensing violence and getting out of the way. Dalton stepped between his father and Rowan. "Stop this. You've lost. Don't make it worse." "Get out of the way," Silas said coldly. "No." "I said move." "And I said no." Dalton's voice was steady. "You taught me to recognize when a fight is lost, when to cut your losses and walk away. Well, this fight is lost. Walk away." "You're not my son," Silas said. "Not anymore." "Good." Dalton didn't flinch. "Because I'm done being part of your empire. Done watching you crush anyone who stands up to you. Done pretending that power and cruelty are the same thing." For a long moment, father and son stared at each other. Then Silas turned to his hired men. "Take them." Everything happened at once. The 4 men drew their guns. Rowan yanked Elara behind him, his own hand going to the rifle on Storm's saddle. Dalton dove sideways, reaching for a weapon he didn't have. The crack of gunfire split the air. But the shot came from the courthouse steps, where Judge Carmichael stood with a smoking pistol pointed at the sky. "Next man who draws on these people answers to me," he shouted, "and to the territorial marshal, who I just sent for. This hearing is concluded. The ruling stands. Anyone who interferes with that is obstructing justice." Behind him, half the courtroom crowd had spilled onto the steps, watching. Witnesses, too many witnesses for even Silas to intimidate. The hired men looked at each other, looked at Silas, looked at the crowd. Slowly, they holstered their weapons. Silas's face had gone purple with rage. "This isn't over, Hale, you hear me? This isn't—" "Yes, it is," Carmichael interrupted. "It's over, Reeves. You lost. Go home." For a moment, Elara thought Silas might actually attack someone barehanded, but then the rage seemed to drain out of him, replaced by something colder and more dangerous. "We'll see," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked away, the hired men following. The crowd on the courthouse steps broke into scattered applause. Carmichael holstered his pistol and disappeared back inside, probably already regretting his moment of conscience. Dalton stood slowly, brushing dirt from his coat. "You should still leave. He meant what he said about this not being over." "What about you?" Elara asked. "I'll stay here for a while. Make sure the marshal follows through on the investigation. Keep an eye on my father's next moves." Dalton managed a tired smile. "Besides, I need to figure out what I'm going to do with my life now that I'm officially disowned." Rowan extended his hand. "Thank you. For everything." Dalton shook it. "I owed you 7 years' worth of apologies. This doesn't even come close to evening the debt." He turned to Elara. "I'm sorry for all of it. For making you feel like you were less than you are. For wasting 7 years of your life making you doubt yourself. You deserved better." Elara looked at the man who'd humiliated her, rejected her, made her the town's favorite target. He was different now, humbled, honest, trying to become someone worth respecting. "You're doing better now," she said. "That's what matters." They mounted their horses and rode out of Cascade Ridge as the sun climbed toward noon. Behind them, the town was still buzzing with the drama of the hearing, already turning it into legend. The ride back to the valley took 2 days, same as before, but it felt different this time, lighter, freer, like they were riding toward something instead of running from it. They reached the pass just before sunset on the second day and stopped at the crest to look down at their valley spread below. The cabin smoke rising, the river catching the last light, the forest dark and welcoming. "Home," Alara said quietly.
"Yeah," Rowan agreed.
"Home." They descended into the valley as darkness fell, and it welcomed them back like it had been waiting. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Rowan taught Alara to run the trap lines, to read animal tracks, to judge weather by the feel of the wind. She taught him to read, slowly and patiently, using the folk-tale book at first, then moving on to more complex texts she ordered from a catalog. Winter came early that year, heavy snow sealing the valley off from the outside world for months. But they were prepared, food stores laid in, firewood stacked high, the cabin chinked tight against the cold. During the long, dark evenings, they read together. Rowan's reading improved slowly, his rough voice gaining confidence as he worked through sentences that had once been incomprehensible symbols. "Listen to this," he said one night in January, 3 months after the hearing. He was reading from a history book, stumbling slightly over the longer words. "It says here that Rome fell not because of invading armies, but because the empire grew too big to govern. The center couldn't hold." "That's what happened to Silas," Alara said from where she was mending one of his shirts. "He built an empire on fear and control, and when the center cracked, the whole thing started falling apart." "You heard the news then?" A letter had arrived the previous week, brought by a trapper passing through. Dalton had written to tell them that Silas's businesses were collapsing. The fraud investigation had uncovered other illegal deals, and investors were pulling out. Bitter Hollow was in chaos, its economy built so heavily on Reeves' money that the withdrawal threatened to turn it into a ghost town. "I heard," Alara said. "Feels strange, like we destroyed a whole town without meaning to." "We didn't destroy anything," Rowan corrected. "Silas built his empire on sand. It was always going to fall. We just happened to be the ones who pushed it." Spring came late but beautiful, the valley blooming with wildflowers and new growth. Rowan's trap lines brought in record profits, enough that he started talking about expanding the cabin, maybe building a barn for more livestock. One morning in April, almost a year after the ribbon ceremony, Alara woke to find Rowan already outside. When she joined him, he was standing at the edge of the clearing, looking at something in his hand. "What is it?" she asked. He showed her, a pale blue ribbon, faded and worn, her ribbon from that night. "1 year," he said quietly. "The bond's complete. By Bitter Hollow law, we're free to go our separate ways if we choose." Alara's heart kicked against her ribs. "Is that what you want?" "No." He turned to face her fully. "But I need to know what you want. You came here because I gave you an escape. You stayed because winter trapped you. Now spring's here, the passes are open, and you have a real choice." She looked at him. This rough mountain man who'd walked into a ceremony hall and chosen the woman everyone else rejected, who'd taught her to shoot, to read weather, to survive, who'd fought for their valley and won, who'd become the center of a life she'd never known she wanted. "I want to stay," she said. "Not because I'm trapped, because this is home. Your home." Rowan's expression softened. "Then we should do this right." "Do what right?" "Get married. Not by Bitter Hollow rules, but real, legal, permanent." Alara felt warmth spread through her chest. "Are you asking me?" "Yeah, I'm asking." He held up the ribbon. "Alara Vance, will you marry
This
me for
story
real?
was posted
No
on the
ceremony
channel
rules,
west
no
of
time
Betrayal.
limits, no escape clauses.
Please do not repost
Just you and me
it in any
building a
form.
life together." She took the ribbon from his hand, feeling the familiar silk under her fingers. Then she wrapped it around his wrist again, tying it with the same 3-loop knot she'd used a year ago. "Yes," she said, "for real this time." They rode to Cascade Ridge 2 weeks later and were married by a territorial judge in a ceremony that took less than 5 minutes. No ribbons, no gallery, no speeches. Just simple vows and signatures on a piece of paper that made it legal. Dalton attended as their witness. He looked healthier than he had at the hearing, less haunted, more settled. He'd started a business of his own, he told them, advising settlers on land claims and helping them navigate territorial law, using everything he'd learned from his father's corruption to help people instead of exploit them. "My father's broke," he said over celebratory drinks after the ceremony. "The fraud investigation cleaned him out. He's living in a boarding house in Bitter Hollow, working as a clerk at the general store." "How's the town doing?" Alara asked. "Surviving. Barely. A lot of people left when the money dried up, but some stayed. They're trying to build something real now instead of living off Silas's scraps." Dalton raised his glass. "To new beginnings." They toasted. Then they rode back to their valley and didn't leave again for 6 months. Years passed. The valley changed with them. The cabin expanded into something larger and more permanent. A barn appeared on the eastern edge of the clearing. Chickens and a few goats made their home in a sturdy coop. Rowan's trap lines brought steady income, and Alara started taking in sewing work from settlements within riding distance, her reputation for quality spreading through the territory. They had hard winters and good summers. Years when the trapping was poor and they had to stretch their resources. Years when everything went right and they could afford small luxuries, books, glass for windows, a real stove to replace the old one. They were never rich, never comfortable by town standards, but they were free and safe, and theirs. 5 years after the ribbon ceremony, a visitor arrived at the valley. Alara saw the rider approaching and called for Rowan, her hand automatically going to the rifle by the door. They'd had trouble a few times over the years, men who thought an isolated valley would be easy pickings. They'd learned otherwise and spread the word. Rowan Hale's valley was off limits. But this rider came slow and careful, hands visible, calling out a greeting while still 50 yards away. It was Webb Morrison, looking older and wearing a different badge now, territorial marshal instead of deputy. "I come in peace," he said, dismounting. "Just wanted to check on you folks, make sure everything's all right." "We're fine," Rowan said cautiously. "What brings a marshal all the way up here?" "Closing old cases, mostly. The fraud investigation into Silas Reeves is finally complete. All charges filed, all trials concluded." Webb accepted the coffee Alara offered, grateful for the warmth. "Thought you'd want to know. Silas died 3 months back. Heart gave out while he was working. They buried him in Bitter Hollow's cemetery." Alara felt a strange mixture of emotions. Relief, mostly, but also a kind of sad finality. "What about his claims against our valley?" Rowan asked. "Are those fully resolved?" "Completely. The territorial office invalidated everything he filed, and your deed is officially clean. Nobody can challenge it now." Webb sipped his coffee. "I also brought something from Dalton. He couldn't make the trip himself. He's running for territorial legislature, believe it or not. But he wanted you to have this." He pulled a letter from his coat and handed it to Alara. She opened it carefully and read Dalton's careful handwriting. The letter was short. An update on his life, congratulations on their continued success, and a final apology for the years of cruelty in Bitter Hollow. At the bottom, he'd written something that made Alara's eyes sting with unexpected tears. "You were always stronger than any of us. I just wish I'd been smart enough to see it before you had to leave to prove it. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. It changed my life." She showed the letter to Rowan, who read it silently. "He turned out all right," Rowan said finally. "Better than anyone expected." Webb finished his coffee and stood to leave. "I'll let you folks get back to your day. Just wanted to make sure you knew the past was finally settled." After he left, Rowan and Alara stood together on the porch, looking out at the valley they'd fought so hard to keep. "Do you ever regret it?" Rowan asked. "Leaving Bitter Hollow? Choosing this life?" Alara thought about the girl she'd been, sitting alone at ribbon ceremonies, defined by her scars, living small and scared. Then she thought about who she'd become. A woman who could shoot straight, survive harsh winters, stand her ground against powerful men, build a life on her own terms. "Never," she said. "Not even once." "Good." Rowan pulled her close, and they stood like that for a long moment, feeling the valley breathe around them. That night, Alara pulled out the pale blue ribbon, now 10 years old, the silk barely holding together, and carefully wrapped it in paper. She tucked it into the metal box where they kept important documents, preserved alongside the deed to their valley, their marriage certificate, and the letter from Dalton. Reminders of where they'd come from, evidence of what they'd survived. The years continued to pass. Rowan's hair started going gray at the temples. Alara's hands grew more calloused from work, stronger from labor. They added rooms to the cabin as they needed them, built fences to keep predators away from their livestock, planted a garden that somehow survived the harsh mountain climate. Other settlers occasionally tried to homestead nearby, but most didn't last more than a season. The isolation was too much, the winters too brutal, the work too hard. But a few stuck it out, and slowly a loose community formed. People who checked on each other across the miles, who helped during emergencies, who traded goods and services when needed. Alara became known as the valley's best seamstress and healer. She'd taught herself medicine from books, learning which plants helped with what ailments, how to set broken bones, how to treat wounds and fevers. People rode for hours to ask her advice, and she never turned anyone away. Rowan became a legend among trappers, the man who knew these mountains better than anyone, who could find game when others found nothing, who defended his valley against a rich man's corruption and won. Young trappers sought him out for advice, and he taught them what he knew, the same way he'd taught Alara. 20 years after the ribbon ceremony, they sat on their porch on a summer evening and watched the sun set over the western ridge. "You know what I was thinking about today?" Alara said. "What?" "That ceremony, the night you chose me." She smiled. "I was so terrified, so sure it was some kind of trick." "It probably looked like one," Rowan admitted. "Strange man walks in and chooses the woman everyone rejected. If I'd been you, I'd have run. I almost did, right up until you said I was strong." She looked at him. "Nobody had ever said that to me before. And I realized I wanted it to be true more than I was afraid it might be a lie." "It was true," Rowan said. "Still is." Alara looked down at her hands, scarred from the fire, scarred from work, scarred from life. Then she touched her face, feeling the familiar landscape of old burns. For most of her life, these scars had been marks of shame, proof that she was damaged, broken, less than whole. But somewhere in the past 20 years, they'd become something different, proof that she'd survived, evidence of strength, a map of everything she'd overcome. "I'm glad you chose me," she said quietly. "I'm glad you said yes," Rowan replied. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell over the valley, watching stars appear one by one in the sky above. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. It always did. Winter to prepare for, traps to check, work to be done. But they'd face it together, the same way they'd faced everything else. Two people who'd found each other in a crowded ceremony hall, who'd chosen the hard path over the safe one, who'd built a life that was theirs and no one else's. The burnt girl and the mountain man, the woman who refused to break and the man who saw her strength when no one else did. Partners, survivors, home. The valley held them as darkness deepened, and in the distance, an owl called its question to the night. Alara closed her eyes and listened to the familiar sounds of home, wind in the pines, the river running, Rowan's steady breathing beside her. She'd survived the fire that killed her family. She'd survived 15 years of being Bitter Hollow's cautionary tale. She'd survived 7 ribbon ceremonies designed to humiliate her. And she'd survived choosing the unknown over the familiar, building a life that terrified her, becoming someone stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. The scars remained. They always would. But they no longer defined her. She defined herself, and that made all the difference.